Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top headlines. Impeached South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol has survived another day outside prison walls. Investigators abandoned their attempt to arrest him, citing safety concerns. For the first time since Bashar al-Assad's ouster, Germany and France's foreign ministers are in Damascus, meeting the country's new leader as terrorism tops Western concerns. And Elon Musk is slamming UK lawmakers over child grooming gang scandals, and in response, he's been told to mind his own business. To our top story now. After a tense 6-hour standoff, South Korean police abandoned their attempt to arrest suspended President Yoon Suk Yeol. The 150 officers were overwhelmed by a large crowd of pro-Yoon supporters outside and a barrier of security staff inside the residence.
유지하기에 혈안이 되어 있습니다. 지킬 수 있으리라 기대했습니다. 식민지배를 절폐하기 위해 나섰던 1차 박수 부탁드리겠습니다. 네, 경호처 비켜라! 경호처!
Meanwhile, under South Korean law, anyone can make an arrest to prevent a crime. Critics now accuse Yoon of inciting his supporters to block his detention, drawing parallels to Donald Trump's January the 6th Capitol riot. Supporters of the impeached president were seen on the streets adopting "Stop the Steal" slogans made popular by Trump's followers back in 2021, hoping the incoming US president will aid their embattled leader. This is the first time a sitting president in South Korea has ever faced arrest. On the streets of Seoul, opinions are pretty much divided. Some support Yoon's arrest and some believe it's constitutional.
I came rushing out to this place filled with anger over the fact that Yoon Suk Yeol has not been swiftly arrested and that they are resisting and not promptly complying with the arrest. I feel extremely frustrated as the current state of rebellion has psychologically demoralized the people. The thought that this situation might continue for a prolonged period leaves me with a deep sense of gloom.
Ever since the warrant was issued, I have been anxiously waiting for it to be executed. This morning, when I heard that the Corruption Investigation Office had set out, I fervently hoped that he would finally be arrested. However, on my way here, I heard that the office had withdrawn, and I felt utterly disheartened and furious, with no way to express my frustration.
I could not suppress the frustration and anger I felt today, seeing how the Corruption and Investigation Office for higher-ranking officials issued an illegal arrest warrant and acted as if it was above the Constitution, and tried to humiliate and oust the legitimately elected president, which was chosen by the people. So I set aside my work today, thinking about how to prevent this country from heading toward communism.
For more on this, I'm joined by the former British ambassador to North Korea, John Everard. John, thank you so much for joining us again. It appears Yoon Suk Yeol is ready to keep defying anti-corruption officials. Can you give us an update on the events that unfolded today in South Korea?
Yes, most of it was covered by the very competent footage you've just shown your viewers. A group of officers from the Corruption Investigation Office arrived at the president's residence at about 8 o'clock Seoul time this morning. They couldn't get anywhere near the residence. They were blocked by supporters and by a unit of the military that is tasked with protecting the president. They upped the numbers to 80 officers and fired to 150. And on the third attempt, a group of officers and investigators were actually allowed into the residence, only to be read a statement by Yoon's lawyers saying that the warrant was illegal and effectively that the president had no intention of complying with it. You have to remember that Yoon Suk Yeol, before he became president, was a chief state prosecutor. He knows these laws inside out, and he knows all the loopholes. I think we can be fairly sure he will fight to the last.
The situation is actually quite complex because he has a warrant out for his arrest, as we just outlined, but he's also protected by these guards. The authorities pretty much unable to arrest him. Why are guards preventing the arrest warrant to be issued by the court? You know, why is he being protected by them in many sense, John?
Because although he has been impeached by the National Assembly, of course, the impeachment has yet to be ruled on by the Constitutional Court, he remains head of the armed forces. He's commander-in-chief. And quite properly, both the soldiers at the residence and the presidential guard take their instructions from him, not from the acting president, Tyson Fury. So they were simply doing what they were told. And they put out a statement to that effect. They were complying with their constitutional obligations, they said. This also means that as and when the Constitutional Court finally delivers a verdict on his impeachment, if it upholds the impeachment, then the oath of loyalty of those soldiers, of those officers to President Yoon Suk Yeol simply ceases to operate, and they will fade away. And I think at that point, he will see the writing on the wall and come away quietly.
The warrant for his arrest expires actually on Monday, so those determined to see him detained will have to think pretty quick and pretty fast on their feet. Do you think authorities will try and execute the arrest warrant again, or do you think they'll wait for the impeachment to go through the courts, as you just outlined?
Personally, I think they might try for a new warrant. Probably not immediately. Also, you have to remember, this is South Korea. Things are never quite as they seem. And I'm left wondering whether those officers actually seriously expected to walk away from that building with Yoon Suk Yeol in detention. You see, I suspect that there's a lot of behind-the-scenes negotiation going on, trying to persuade President Yoon to resign, which, of course, would cut through all the complexities of the impeachment process in return for probably safe passage out of the country. And I think a lot of what happened today was the current authorities just showing some of their cards, reminding him that they do have the power to charge him with insurrection, which in theory even carries the death penalty. It would certainly mean a long period in prison if he's convicted of it. And they were effectively saying, President Yoon, do you really want this? Would you not prefer just to fade away and enjoy a comfortable retirement somewhere?
You've just outlined those things, and in a sense, is this a real breakdown of law and order in South Korea?
No. The crisis was 3rd December. There was a nasty moment when Yoon Suk Yeol declared martial law. But that was over within a matter of hours. The National Assembly struck the martial law decree down. What we've been seeing since then has been the South Korean constitution working. There's been quite a lot of grinding noises, and not everything has worked as smoothly as one might have hoped. But there's a definite process, or rather processes, involved here. Everybody knows what the rules are, and they will eventually deliver a solution, possibly quite quickly. Remember that the impeachment trial has already started. It started last Friday, and nobody knows how long the Constitutional Court will take to deliver a verdict. But it may be that we see something fairly soon, or it may be several weeks. Whatever. When the Constitutional Court finally decides whether or not the impeachment was valid, then we have a clear situation and South Korea moves forward.
John Everard, the former British ambassador to North Korea, thank you so much for joining me with your insights this evening. Let's turn to Syria, where there has been a flurry of diplomatic visits as the war-torn country seeks to rebuild and find its place in the ever-changing world order. Germany's top diplomat, Annalena Baerbock, and her French counterpart, Jean-Noël Barrot, met the new Syrian leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa, in Damascus. The pair are the first EU diplomats to visit Syria since Bashar al-Assad's ouster. Now, staying with that visit, political transition seems to be the key word for the diplomats who toured the notorious Sednaya prison, a remnant of the pain and suffering under the Assad regime. Germany's Baerbock talking to social media, saying that there are expectations on the new Syrian leaders to give every ethnic and religious group a place in the political process, adding that the visit is a clear signal that a new political beginning between Europe and Syria is now possible. One of the primary concerns in the West is the resurgence of terrorist groups like ISIS, an offshoot of al-Shabaab's HTS. Speaking at a meeting in Damascus, France's Barrot emphasized the need to quash terrorism and also maintain security.
A sovereign and secure Syria cannot leave any place for Islamist terrorism. Terrorism has struck you. Terrorism has struck us in our flesh. That's why we fought side by side alongside the Kurds in the northwest of Syria against Islamist terrorism. We struck again on December 31, just a few days ago, a position of Daesh, because we do not accept that a resurgence of Islamist terrorism can come to compromise the recovery of Syria and threaten the security of France and Europe.
For more on this, our correspondent Riz Khan joins us now from Paris. Ross, good evening to you. Firstly, what was the purpose of this trip?
Well, good evening, Leigh-Ann. This is the next level of these visits that we've seen. We've seen the diplomats go in the first instance at a lower level. Now we've seen that to ministerial level with Annalena Baerbock and Jean-Noël Barrot going on this joint trip, Franco-German joint visits to Damascus. The purpose to show that there is support if the HTS rebel group, if the de facto leadership of Syria could continue on a path of unity, can continue to try to unite the country, could continue to try to show that they are doing away with the worst excesses of the Assad regime, that there is support from the Western allies for continued engagement, continued mediation, continued negotiation with the terror group to understand if they are going to be continued proscribed or if they're going to be removed from that list. France and Germany, key members of the United Nations, key members of the European Union, and that is still proscribed a terror group on that list. So they want to have these face-to-face conversations, Leigh-Ann, in person with people like Ahmed al-Sharaa to understand his policies and his projections and objectives for what he wants to achieve for Syria in this coming year.
Yes, indeed, Ross. But what did the foreign minister say? The German minister made it clear Europe will not fund Islamist structures.
Yeah, Annalena Baerbock has said that there needs to be moderation and understanding. She did, and I quote, say there needs to be an avoidance of the acts of vengeance against different groups within the population. Ahmed al-Sharaa has said that he wants to ensure that Syria going forward is a Syria that welcomes all of its different sects, that there are no acts of retaliation against any particular part of the population. Syria made up of such a mix of different religions and different denominations within those religions as well. Of course, that ethnic mix as well is important to the overall understanding of Syria demographically. She did say that she wants to help Syria become a functioning state with full control over its territory. And turning to her French counterpart here, there was a cabinet meeting here in France today, but Jean-Noël Barrot not attending that because he was in Damascus with his German counterpart. He said that he wants to see a sovereign, stable and peaceful Syria, saying that France will be standing alongside the Syrian people in all their diversity to support a peaceful transition that guarantees the rights of all Syrians.
Ross, how might we see European policy towards Syria develop heading into this year?
Well, we need to understand in terms of the lists of prescribed terror organisations. Now, the European Union generally follows the United Nations in terms of its specific lists for which organisations should be prescribed, which ones should be sanctioned, which ones should be permitted to operate. And we have seen some moves over the last couple of weeks from the United Nations saying that they have recognised that Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, the de facto leadership of Syria, have made messages of goodwill. They have broadcast messages of unity and inclusiveness, and the United Nations will be looking very closely at whether it needs to maintain HTS on its list of outlawed organisations or whether it needs to permit it to function, and the European Union, Leigh-Ann, very likely to follow the position of the United Nations on that. Also, what we should watch very closely going forward are the links to Russia's war in Ukraine. Now, the European Union has been trying to undermine Russia diplomatically, financially, and of course militarily on the battlefield in Ukraine, giving support to Kiev and the Ukrainian armed forces. The European Union will also want to see a reduction of Russia's influence in Syria. One way that Annalena Baerbock has suggested that could be achieved is by the closure of Russian bases within Syria. They have an air base, Khmeimim, in the north, and they have a naval base, Tartus, on the coast of the Mediterranean. And so she and other Western allies would like to see the closure of those bases to reduce Russian influence in the region. However, we have also heard noises coming from Hayat Tahrir al-Sham that they would like to maintain some form of relationship with Russia, despite the fact that the Kremlin were the biggest backers of the now ousted Assad regime, and the former first family, Bashar al-Assad, his wife Asma, and their children are now believed to be physically present in Moscow. Despite that, we have also heard HTS saying they want to maintain a relationship with Moscow. Overall, it would be worth watching this year, Leigh-Ann, for the next level in terms of the visits. We've seen the diplomats, we've seen the foreign ministers. Will we see a German chancellor, a French president, perhaps an Italian prime minister arriving on the ground in Syria? There needs to be much more work done before that can happen, though, to understand the position of HTS going forward. We know the German foreign minister has called for elections as soon as possible. We know that HTS has said it will take 3 to 4 years for those to happen. So a lot of water needs to pass under the bridge, but we are seeing these movements bit by bit, and more formalisation of the relationship between Brussels, the wider European Union, and Syria.
Well, Ross, as soon as the presidents do go out and visit, you'll have to come back and tell us all about it. Ross Cullen, our correspondent in Paris, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Now, Al-Sharaa, speaking to Al Arabiya last week, has signalled inclusivity along drafting a new constitution, taking a population census and holding elections. More recently, during the Syrian foreign minister's first visit, Assad Hassan al-Shaibani has told Saudi officials in Riyadh that the new leadership wants to set up government involving all parts of Syrian society. Now, over to the UK, where the government are currently dealing with a scandal involving child grooming gangs. The Labour government is under fire after refusing calls to hold an inquiry into historic sexual abuse by grooming gangs in Oldham. Tech billionaire Elon Musk, known for his outspoken views, has now weighed in on the debate. Musk, after angering the German government by endorsing the far-right AfD party, is now upsetting British MPs by accusing the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, of failing to bring rape gangs to justice when he led the Public Prosecution Service. Musk describes Starmer as two-tier Keir, claiming there was no justice for violent crimes but prison for social media posts. He also slammed Safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips, saying that she deserves to be in prison for blocking those grooming gangs. Meanwhile, the House Secretary, Wes Streeting, also responded to Musk, stating that some of his comments were misinformed and urging the tech mogul to roll up his sleeves and assist the government in tackling online child abuse. Responding to Musk, the UK Public Health Minister, Andrew Gwynn, also hit back by saying that the tech billionaire should focus on issues on the other side of the Atlantic. For more on this, our reporter Ollie Barrett joins me now from London. Ollie, a pleasure to have you this evening. Firstly, can you explain for us some background on this current scandal on Rotherham and the grooming gangs and how the current Prime Minister Keir Starmer is actually connected to all of this?
Well, it's quite a long story. There have been a series of scandals in this country, in a series of English towns in the north and the Midlands and the southwest of England, in which over a number of years it emerged that there were so-called grooming gangs or rape gangs, which had been grooming young girls and women and effectively sexually abusing many hundreds of them over a period of a number of years. And in some of these locations, it turned out that the victims were largely white young women and girls, and the people carrying out these crimes were often gangs made up of largely British Pakistani men. Now, over a number of years, as these scandals came out, there were sometimes criticisms of Keir Starmer when he was the Director of Public Prosecutions in this country in a former role before he became a politician. At the time, he recognised that some of the ways in which some of these crimes were investigated and prosecuted had not been up to scratch. Indeed, some of the inquiries into these episodes did talk about a political correctness affecting the ability and the likelihood of some authorities in wanting to investigate some of these crimes, given some of the allegations were revolving around the ethnicity of some of the perpetrators of these crimes. Now he's in government. Clearly, as Prime Minister, he's also coming under pressure because of the safeguarding minister's decision back in October not to launch a full public inquiry into some of the crimes that unfolded in the town of Oldham. And so he's connected very much in a present sense, but also in an historic sense to some of these crimes that were perpetrated, as I say, in a series of English towns over a number of years.
Ollie, as I mentioned earlier, the Labour Party have refused to hold an inquiry. Can you just tell me why they have chosen to make this decision?
There was a call from the Oldham local authorities back in July to the new government to organise a public inquiry into grooming gangs in Oldham. Now, Jess Phillips responded in October, and she said that she didn't think it was right for the government to support a full public inquiry into what had happened in Oldham. But she wasn't saying that was because there shouldn't be any inquiry at all. She was suggesting that Oldham local authorities, the local council there, should organise it themselves. And she also pointed to the fact that there have been a series of inquiries into some of these specific issues in different towns and cities in England. And there was an overarching UK inquiry into child sexual abuse back in 2022, which also looked into some of these issues. So she wasn't ruling out all and any inquiries into these issues, or indeed that the government should act on some of the inquiry recommendations that have been handed down in past inquiries. But that has emerged as a controversial issue now, with the government under significant pressure to go ahead and say that there should be public backing from the central government in London for an inquiry into what took place in Oldham. That's really where this latest round of controversy developed from.
Elon Musk has weighed in on the debate. What has been the impact of his intervention on both the media coverage and on the politicians involved?
Well, one impact is that it's really fired up the debate around this story again. It's fired up scrutiny around this story again on the media, on police forces, on local authorities, on social care services, and on politicians from several major parties here in the UK who have been responsible at different times in different parts of the country for looking into some of these issues. The other thing it's done is raised concerns around the relationship between the UK UK government and the incoming Trump administration, given that Elon Musk appears to be set to be a key part of that Trump administration. In recent days, Elon Musk has criticised the UK government over its tax policies and suggested that the UK wouldn't be an interesting investment destination for international companies. At that point, the UK government didn't seem minded to want to get involved in a war of words with Elon Musk. But today, as you were setting out with those words from Andrew Gwynn and from the Health Secretary Wes Streeting, it appears that the government has made a decision that it can't just let Elon Musk criticise the UK government online without some kind of response coming from the government. So it appears that Number 10 Downing Street has decided that at this point they have had to hit back. But they have to handle this very carefully, as I say, given that Elon Musk looks set to be an important part of the incoming Trump administration.
Yes, indeed, Ollie. Ollie Barrett joining us there from London. Thank you very much for your insights this evening. Now let's take a look at some other news stories from around the world. The cut-off of Russian gas supplies to a breakaway region in Moldova has forced the closure of all industrial companies except for food producers. Flows of Russian gas via Ukraine, which supplied Central and Eastern Europe, were halted at the end of 2024 as Kyiv rejected doing further business with Moscow. Ukraine had allowed Russia to keep pumping gas across its territory despite nearly 3 years of war. President Zelensky has described the end of Russian gas transit as one of Moscow's biggest defeats. Now, several Brazilian Air Force investigators are analysing data from the Azerbaijani airliner that crashed on Christmas, resulting in 38 deaths. Azerbaijan claims the jet was unintentionally shot down by Russia. The Imbara aircraft, which was made in Brazil, was en route from Baku to Grozny when it was diverted. It crashed while trying to land near the city of Aktu after flying hundreds of kilometres east across the Caspian Sea. Due to the subdued economic outlook, the number of unemployed people in Germany is expected to continue to rise this year and hit the 3 million mark for the first time in 10 years. The number of people out of work increased by 10,000 to nearly 2.9 million. Analysts polled by Reuters had expected that figure to rise by 15,000. The Labour office said it's not all gloom and doom, as Germany has the fourth lowest unemployment rate in the EU with a rate of 3.4%. Major airports in Germany were hit by a nationwide IT outage affecting police systems at border control today. The outage caused a string of queues at border control at several German airports, including Frankfurt, the country's busiest airport. The regional public broadcaster reported that passengers were waiting for 2 hours at immigration while others kept being kept on the plane. Now, a huge red-hot object fell from the sky in a Kenyan village. A metallic object weighing about 500 kilos and measuring about 2 meters in diameter crashed in Makuku village. According to the Kenya Space Agency assessments, they suggest that this object is a separation ring from a rocket's launch vehicle. Now, for our top news stories today, Luke Littler has beaten Stephen Bunting to book his place in the final of the World Darts Championship. The 17-year-old was favourite to progress to the final for a second year running and swept Bunting aside, winning 6-1 at Alexandra Palace in London. He will face 3-time champion Michael van Gerwen for the title tonight. A win for Luke Littler would make him the youngest world champion in the sport ever. And Novak Djokovic has crashed out of the Brisbane International in a shock defeat. The top seed lost to Riley Opelka, who is ranked 293rd in the world in straight sets. Meanwhile, the 24th Grand Slam winner Djokovic will now shift his focus to winning an 11th Australian Open title under his new coach Andy Murray, and that will happen later this month. A reminder of our top stories. Impeached South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol has survived another day outside prison walls. Investigators abandoned their attempt to arrest him, citing safety concerns. The foreign ministers of Germany and France are in Damascus meeting with the new Syrian leader as terrorism climbs to the top of the list for Western countries. And Elon Musk is slamming UK lawmakers over child grooming gang scandals, and in response he's been told to mind his own business. And that's all from us on W News this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Hadley Gamble, she's coming up next. And don't miss Tom Burges Watson with GNT. Good night and have a lovely Friday evening.
Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome, and a happy new year to you. I'm Riz Khan. As we begin 2025, let's go over some of the remarkable guests and interview topics we've covered since the show launched at the start of 2024. As I always point out, we cover leading news issues, mostly conflicts and serious global matters, but also add some human interest stories, attention-grabbing topics, and inspiring people. And 2024 offered quite a lot of those. Talking of inspiring people, one that stood out was the remarkable Slovenian philosopher and public intellectual Slavoj Žižek. We spoke just before the US presidential vote, and even at 75, Professor Žižek shows no sign of holding back his very frank and delightfully candid perspective on the state of the world.
I think that the first question we should ask is, how come that from the kind of American consensus which lasted till some 15, 20 years ago, how was it possible that a figure like Trump emerged? Don't blame the fanatical right, blame the liberal center. Trump exploited deftly faithful limitations of this benevolent welfare state liberal center. We should begin with self-critique, not just with attacking Trump.
Well, I was going to say, it seems that politics is sometimes less relevant because research is showing that many societies are now looking for strong leaders, and that might explain the popularity of someone like Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. First of all, I wonder if you see them as strong leaders in the first instance, and how perhaps society is gravitating towards these kind of strong figures that they want in power.
I agree with you, although I would add that it's more ambiguous. Like, take Trump. Yes, he is authoritarian and so on. But for me, the basic characteristic of an authentic, and I believe in them, authentic strong leader is dignity and this spontaneously emanating authority. Trump is not that. Trump plays a strong leader, but he plays it in an ironic way, making fun of himself and so on and so on. Even with Putin, you can find something similar. He is not dignified. He, from time to time, goes into obscenities and so on. So it's very sad what is happening. I am not some kind of anarchist leftist. Sometimes an authentic, strong leader is needed. And today it is. By authentic, strong leader, I don't mean the one who is a dictator and just tells you what is better for you than you yourself know. No. An authentic, strong leader shakes you, moves you. He makes you feel, yes, we can do this. He opens a new space, a hope. We don't get such strong leaders today.
Now, I know, Professor, you're not a fan of Vladimir Putin, but, you know, can you sympathize in any way with the position of President Putin against military expansion on his doorstep, especially with Ukraine's ambition to be part of NATO? The narrative, of course, in the West is very much against him, but can you see his point of view?
Here, maybe I will disappoint you. I see his point of view, of course, but nonetheless, I have so many friends, not just in Ukraine, but in Baltic countries and so on, so that I don't accept this simple narrative that Ukrainians are engaged in a, let's call it, as it's usually said, proxy war of NATO against Russia. I think if you look at what goes on in last decades, Russian intervention in Georgia, Georgia, then Crimea occupation and so on. Just read, I do regularly, I can read passively Russian. I follow their own ideology. It's clear that it's not even some remainder of Soviet Union, it's simply imperial ambition. What I find crucial is that in his two speeches, in 22, you know, when Putin announced intervention in Ukraine, 21st and 23rd of February, he only critically mentioned in each speech one name, Lenin. He even said that Ukraine should be renamed Ukraine of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. So he is really returning to the Tsarist imperial tradition of Russian Empire, where Ukrainian national sovereignty, right to be a state of its own, is negated. I'm very critical towards many things going on in Ukraine. Corruption goes on, economic catastrophe, and so on. But nonetheless, I think when we put pressure on Ukraine, be more for peace and so on, let's face what is their choice. Their choice is not peace of war. Their choice is we resist Russia or we disappear as a nation. Russia is repeatedly saying it, is doing it in the parts of Ukraine it occupies. So I am for peace, for a compromise. But let's be clear, without the Western help, Ukraine would not even be in a position to negotiate for peace. It's precisely the fact that Ukraine was able to resist fast Russian victory which enables serious negotiations for peace. But if I may make here another point, what really worries me is that with the catastrophic Western politics, where they all the time give serious warnings to Israel but put no serious pressure on Israel, what Putin is doing with BRICS, he is now constituting a new bloc so that the opposition will be developed West versus Palestinians and so on, and Ukraine will find itself on the West, as if you defend Ukraine, if you are for Ukrainian defense, you are for Western imperialism, to cut a long story short. And so Putin is, I think, winning in the so-called third world, Africa, Latin America, and Asia, and that's for me the true catastrophe.
The remarkable Slavoj Žižek. I look forward to speaking with him again soon. In terms of news developments, all eyes were on Syria on the 8th of December as a half-century plus of Assad family rule suddenly ended as the opposition group, HTS, took control of the capital, Damascus, forcing President Bashar al-Assad to flee to Russia. We managed to connect with journalist Danny Mackey, who was in Damascus as the opposition forces moved in and the government toppled. He was navigating around curfews and power cuts to join our show. And when did you first get a sense that the opposition forces, the Military Operations Administration, as it's called, first arrived into Damascus?
We got a sense when we heard the gunfire in the capital, and we heard that they'd arrived at the broadcasting center in Umayyad Square. Now, when they got to this center, and it was really, you know, the old school traditional head for the media building kind of coup, when they arrived there, they actually issued a statement saying, on Syrian television, saying the regime had actually collapsed. And that was really fitting for a 60-year-old regime, that it would be done in that kind of way. Also, we heard a number of, clashes. We heard reports. We could see that they were massing around the edges of the capital. And, when you've lost most of Damascus countryside and, they've actually infiltrated the center, you could see things had come to an end. But you didn't see any heavy weapons. And what we saw at the start was just, militants carrying AK-47s, maximum having a couple of RPGs. We didn't see any really heavy weapons, which suggests that there wasn't a fight at all.
What's been the mood of the people on the street? Of course, we've heard reports of all the celebrations supporting the downfall of Bashar Assad. Are there any voices in support of him?
Well, absolutely not. I think Assad is, dead and buried when it comes to Syria. Even his main coastal kind of support base has pretty much abandoned him. And, why wouldn't they? This was an individual who said that, he would live, he was born in Syria and he would die in Syria. And, when push came to shove, he just upped and left the country, and he left his own security detail behind. He didn't even take them with him, which shows you, there were also reports that he emptied out the Syrian central bank. So this individual clearly had no concern for anything but his own interests. And him going to Russia, applying for refugee status at the end is, really fitting end to someone who has created so many refugees himself.
One of the big stories coming out is how many people have been freed from the prisons.
A number of different people, thousands, and all across Syria, tens of thousands have been released from the prisons, from Adra to Saydnaya to Aleppo, Hama. And many of these people really did nothing wrong, but maybe say a couple of words against the regime, maybe have some sort of, a couple of issues behind them. And some of these people stayed there for decades, especially the political prisoners. There were people who'd been in there since the start of the crisis. And, the Assad regime's prisons were really, slaughterhouses. So many of these locations to actually find, hundreds of individuals was really a blessing that you could actually see them, because for the Assad regime, this was a place where people came to die. I mean, no one went into Syrian prisons to actually come out.
We heard reports that there were actually people, a large number of people, who were scheduled to be executed on the day the regime fell. It seems they basically got a last-minute reprieve.
Yeah, I mean, for them, it was definitely a miracle. And for the rest of Syria, it's been a miracle as well, because the rest of Syria was probably expected to perish within a couple of days because of the situation in the country. I mean, and when I mean that, I mean the economic situation in the country, which you have an absolutely wrecked financial system. You have a country which, everything's getting more expensive. The salaries keep getting even lower. And when speaking from an economic sense, an entire population was struggling, to really meet any sort of need. So this was something which the Syrians needed change. They got the change they needed. And going forward, they're going to have to handle how to challenge the many issues which are going to come towards them in the future, which will be substantial and which need many sensible heads.
Danny Mackey there in Damascus as everything suddenly turned upside down. One of the serious global issues we covered in 2024 is the very serious matter of plastic pollution. Plastic is, of course, a very versatile and valuable product. The problem is the very poor disposal of it and the danger that has created for the environment, wildlife and humans. Enter Boyan Slat, the 30-year-old CEO of the Ocean Cleanup, founded by him 11 years ago as a teenager. The Dutch entrepreneur, inventor and dedicated activist has been making a remarkable difference not only by raising awareness, but also actually cleaning up plastic pollution from rivers and oceans. And he sees it as a very achievable goal.
Boyan, great to have a chance to have a chat. Now, many would argue you can't put a price on having clean oceans, but you've effectively done just that. You recently revealed your assessment of how long it will take to complete your mission to remove plastic from the seas and how much it will cost. Now, people might be surprised by the numbers, so tell me what you know.
Sure, yeah. So at the current level of performance, so basically what we have already achieved to date, we can clean up the Great Pacific Garbage Patch in 10 years' time at a cost of $7.5 billion. So that's less than half of what America is spending on Halloween decorations on an annual basis. Now, so I think, it's compared to a world problem, it's something that we should be able to afford. However, we're also looking to do it even faster and even cheaper. So by improving the way we detect where the highest concentrations of plastic are inside of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, we think we can actually do it in just 5 years' time at a cost of $4 billion. So yeah, really now for the first time ever, we know what it will take to return the Pacific Ocean to its clean and pristine state.
That's a fascinating comparison, literally half of the Halloween decorations in the US. But give me this perspective, because there are always skeptics out there. Why do you see this as value for money? What else could you get for that amount?
Yeah, so I think it's important to put it in the context of not cleaning the ocean, right? And according to a study done by Deloitte a couple of years ago, the plastic pollution problem as a whole is costing humanity up to $19 billion per year. And if you take into account all the ecosystem services that the ocean is providing, you're actually looking north of $500 billion in terms of harm that the pollution is doing to our ocean every year. So if you think in terms of ROI, it's way cheaper to clean the ocean than to not clean the ocean.
Let me ask you about this, because obviously there's a trail involved. How does plastic get from the factory to the ocean?
Yes, every year humanity uses roughly 400 million tons of plastic per year. During its use, it's providing a lot of value to humanity. It's a versatile material. It's an energy efficient material as well. But unfortunately, not all of that plastic gets collected and processed in a responsible way. So you'll have essentially leakage from the system. And some of that plastic is able to end up in our waterways, so in rivers in particular. And through rivers, it then ends up in the ocean. So, and we're talking about quite a small fraction. So less than 0.5% of the plastic that's being used ends up in rivers and flows into the ocean. But of course, that 0.5% is able to do a tremendous amount of harm to the environment, to coastal economies, and also to humanity in terms of the potential health risks of that plastic ending up in our food chain.
Isn't that amazing? It's such a small percentage, yet so important. We'll talk more about the important role of rivers in transporting plastic waste to the sea. Give us some idea of what happens when it gets there.
So once plastic is in the ocean, actually most of it only stays in the ocean for a relatively short time. So the majority will end up back on shore, on coastlines, washes up in a matter of weeks to months. And of course, that's still not a good thing, right? Because it damages tourism. Coastlines are also important ecosystems. But effectively, it does, most of it removes itself from the ocean in a relatively short amount of time. But some plastic is able to make its way all the way to the open ocean, where if it does, it will end up in one of the 5 gyres. So that's an area where ocean currents converge, where plastic can enter, but it can never leave. And out of those 5 oceanic gyres that exist on Earth, the largest one is in the North Pacific, and that's also the most polluted one. So more than half of the world's plastic pollution that's stuck in the ocean can be found in that one, and that's of course the infamous Great Pacific Garbage Patch.
Plastic accumulates in huge subtropic oceanic areas called gyres. Massive circular currents that trap the plastic for decades, if not centuries. There are 5 gyres in our oceans. The most polluted and best studied is the infamous Great Pacific Garbage Patch, located in the North Pacific Ocean between Hawaii and California.
It's interesting, so to explain for our viewers, gyre you mean by almost like a gyroscopic swirl of water, and the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is something that I remember discussing years ago. What is it? What would you want people to know about that, and what do you remember about encountering it for the first time?
Yeah, so it's so if we take the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is the largest accumulation of trash on Earth. This is an area that spans an area 3 times the size of France. It contains more than 100 million kilos of plastic. And what's really fascinating is to, when we take that plastic out and we look at the age of the plastic, we see that a lot of it is actually very old plastic because, again, once it's there to stay. It's stuck indefinitely until of course, it ends up in the stomach of a fish or whatnot. But in principle, it's there to stay for a very long time. So we even see stuff dating back to the 1960s that are still. We even have at a Vietnam War drinking bottle from the U.S. Army that we found in still recognizable shape, still floating around out there in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So that really goes to show that, why we have to go out there and clean it up. Sure, of course, it's essential to prevent more plastic from entering the ocean. But if that's the only thing we do, the ocean will be polluted forever because those ocean garbage patches, they persist. And that's why I have to go out and clean this up.
The young and talented founder of the Ocean Cleanup and startling images of the plastic pollution problem. Talking of talent, I was really pleased to meet one of my favorite actors, Mads Mikkelsen, at the large Comic-Con event in the Kazakh capital, Astana. The Danish star is known mostly for playing bad guys in everything from the worlds of Indiana Jones, James Bond, Marvel's Doctor Strange, Harry Potter, and Star Wars. Quite the Hollywood CV. And despite the fact he even played the terrifying serial killer Hannibal Lecter for the TV series, he's actually remarkably friendly and down to earth in real life. But Mads does say that when it comes to acting, he prefers being the villain.
I'll take it any day. I mean, back home in Denmark, I get to play all kind of different characters, variety of human beings. And yes, in America, there's a tendency, if you have a funny accent, that they will make you the baddie. But I'll take it.
Knowing you over a couple of days, you just got to be one of the nicest guys. And for the fans here at Comic-Con, incredibly gracious. I mean, your hands are covered with ink from signing. Yeah. I mean, it's thousands, actually, of signatures you've done.
Yeah, there's been a lot of people here, and it's massive. And they're very disciplined. They're standing in line. And if they're disciplined and can stand in line for hours, I can also sit for a few hours. Yeah.
How do you feel about the way cinema has gone? Because you do I'm going to call it the pure stuff in Denmark, where it's about the acting, it's not special effects, big productions, smaller budgets, and it's all about you guys. Yeah. How do you find cinemas going when you see it's all about the action stuff for a lot of the world, and the Western movie world?
Well, that's true to a degree. I mean, in America, they still make a lot of indie films and solid, good stories. But obviously, what we know America for is Hollywood, and Hollywood tend to be very high budgets, right? And there's a lot of repeat things. You do the franchises, and then the third and the fifth, and so on. And some of it is fantastic, and some is not. But that's always been the case with that machinery over there. I grew up with American films. I didn't watch small French or Polish films when I was a kid. I looked with fascination towards Hollywood, right? And then later on in life, I became in love with some of the independent films and French films, Polish films. But as a kid, it was the big Hollywood thing. So there's a part of a dream coming true that you actually, at my age, get to have a sword in the hand and swing around and fight some giant monsters. It is fantastic fun.
And the weird thing is now AI is having such an impact. Yeah. Special effects went to another level.
Yeah.
And they made you...
We don't know where it's going, though. I mean, it's kind of in its infancy right now. But I've already seen stuff online that's unbelievable. You can't tell the difference between the real thing or not, right?
You and Harrison Ford both made so much younger for Dial of Destiny,
That's
the
true.
Indiana
Yeah.
Jones movie.
Yeah, that was his technique was one thing, was called, I think it was called deep fake.
That's right.
Right, and they already had a little sample of that after a couple of days, and it was just unbelievable. It's just basically him as a young man. They took all the frames that he's ever done as Indiana Jones as a younger person, put them in a computer, and then Harrison, at the age of 80, played the scenes, but they morphed his mimics on it. It was just amazing. In the beginning, they didn't want to do anything with me. They just dyed my hair really black, and I had to tell them, guys, the black hair makes me look really old, so we have to do something.
It's ironic because someone working in news like me, I mean, deep fake has become a major, frightening issue.
Oh, it
you know,
is
you can
frightening.
imagine.
Of course it's frightening.
No one knows what to believe or not.
No, that is the scary part. When it comes to news or politicians proclaiming certain things. And there's no shortage of people who would like to use that. So they'll have to find a shape and a form eventually, but it's here to stay. You can't uninvent it, right?
It's online. You're a 1965 baby, so the years are catching up. I'm older than you, so I can talk. But it's interesting you're doing these action movies and things. Are you finding? I mean, do you get a lot of preparation time? Are you physically able to keep up with the stuff?
I'm fairly able. As a kid, I was a gymnast.
That's right.
And gymnastics comes in really handy when you do stunts. And I do take pride in doing all my own stunts. I mean, I can not watch if somebody's doing a stunt that I'm not allowed to do. I just hate it. So it's very rare that I don't get to do it unless it's something with a car or something, right? So, but yeah, I can still do all this stuff. The thing is, you always get bruised up or hurt. You always do. And that's fine. But the healing time is a little different now than it was 20 years ago. It just, yeah.
You told a very funny story to me over dinner about you riding for the first time, and it wasn't just even simply riding. You'd mentioned it earlier on. Tell me about it.
Yeah, so they gave me a horse, and I was playing this guy who was an archer. So after like half an hour on the horse, I had no idea what I was doing. They just said, okay, now we go full gallop and let go of the reins. I was like, what do you mean? Just let go of the reins and gallop. So that was the way I learned to ride without the reins, and then shooting this bow thing, and then call upon my bird that would land eventually when I called him. Right?
That was you're going to say you had the horse, the bird, and the boat.
Yeah, and that was tricky because my bird hated the horse. He was so afraid of it, and my horse was so afraid of the bird. I was constantly going like yo-yo with this one and this one. It was crazy, but I learned a lot from that. So ever since then, I can actually sit on any horse and do pretty fine.
Now, I've seen a few interviews of yours, and you said you don't like method acting. And some people really bury themselves into it. They don't even come out of character, when they leave the set.
Yeah.
What is it that bothers you?
But I think there's a misunderstanding when I said that. I definitely don't hate method acting, but I think there is a misunderstanding of what that is. Because the whole thing about preparation, you have to learn a certain trade. If you're cutting somebody's hair, you have to learn that in a film. Or you need to be a way to learn something very specific. That's not method acting. This is just preparation. We all do that to a degree. Method acting is a fairly boring technique of being able to repeat certain emotional things. And you will attach it to a physical thing. For instance, like drinking a cup of coffee in a certain way will awaken some specific emotion in you. So it's quite boring, actually. But there is a fascination of people, living on the top of a mountain and for 2 years, and their real life children has to call them a different name. That I find pretentious. But as many other things, people who use that technique, you will find people who are fantastic actors and some are not. And people who don't use it can be fantastic actor and some are not.
Something that happened not long ago, actually it's an ongoing thing, is what happened in that movie Rust, that Alec Baldwin was shooting.
Oh, right, yes.
And it surprised a lot of people to know there were real guns used as props.
That's a disastrous story, that one. Obviously, I wasn't there. I don't know what went down. We don't even have real rounds in Denmark. You just can't get your hands on them. So that's not an issue in where I come from. But having said that, even blanks are lethal. If you shoot a blank on a certain distance, it's a lethal thing because there's so much coming out of that barrel. So what happened on that film, I don't know. It's crazy when you hear when they break it down. Everything went wrong.
what it made a lot of people wonder is how much preparation is there, how much safety. So how much have you seen in the time you've been in the movies, greater preparation for dangers or potential? I mean, the stunts.
Yeah, it's obviously preparing to Denmark is an infancy of stunts and stuff like that. We don't have an enormous industry, so there's a few people running that. But safety has become more and more important. And it is definitely in England and America. I mean, it's because people are suing each other left and right if something goes wrong, right? But it's always been, since I started, it's always been like, I have responsibility for checking the gun I get and look at it and show my fellow actors that it's empty or that it's a blank. It's always been the case, so I don't know what went wrong there.
The enigmatic Hollywood star, Mads Mikkelsen. Well, Saudi Arabia is transforming rapidly as it heads towards the 2030 vision of a newly charged and vibrant society. A few years ago, women had to be totally covered up and were not allowed to drive cars, but all that has changed. Still, who would have thought back then that I would be speaking with an all-female Saudi psychedelic rock band? That's the sound of Syria, and the band members Noura, Haya, Mish and Thing, not her real name, join me from Riyadh. And Thing, of course, you know, people are going to see you there on the drums. Some might be intimidated by the fact you've got that look. Explain that look to me.
I'll tell you 100%, I'm the scariest person in the band. I pass by, people don't see me coming, and they're like, whoa, what's going on? Some people go, Bismillah, you know? It's really funny. But, so this mask is basically used to reside in my mom's salon at home. She had, like, collected these vintage and really old pieces from the Arabian Peninsula. They're like antiques, like bangles, necklaces, daggers, things like that. And I remember seeing this one for the longest time ever. So when the band formed, like, 2 years ago, and we were about to perform, I thought I would wear, you know, like a mask, because I really love, like, Slipknot, Daft Punk, Kiss. Everybody had, like, hidden their identity. It was like this element of mystery, and I really liked it as a gimmick, you know, like a prop. And I thought it'd be really cool to wear one, so I got it to the band. I'm like, what do you guys think? And they loved it. They were like, yeah, it works.
What do you think, Mish, is the most kind of misunderstood thing? Because, you know, people are going to be watching this and saying, 4 Saudi women playing this kind of music or have this kind of influence on them. I think there's a lot of stereotyping. How much are you having to deal with that?
I mean, maybe like, well, we were told before, like, if you did a genre that was more digestible, like pop and stuff, you would go really big and whatever. But we wanted to do our own thing, whatever that thing was. And people seem to like it, and the metal scene and rock scene in Saudi is growing more and more. I mean, Metallica came to Middle East last year, and this year they're getting Muse and 30 Seconds to Mars. So it's not really like, there are a lot of people that are into this music here.
Well, you guys are cutting edge, not only in the fact that you've made such a name for yourself already with the first female Saudi group playing, you know, this kind of very unique type of music as well and blend of stuff, but also because you're going to be role models for a lot of young musicians. And I wonder, when it comes to these young musicians, particularly women and girls, perhaps even from your region, what would be the advice you'd give them on taking up the career that you guys have managed to achieve?
Yeah, go ahead.
Honestly, our first piece of advice would be just do it. It sounds cliche, it sounds very overused and oversaid, but really just take the first step. Connect with other people around you. If your style is to make music with other people, just like it is for us, then connect with other people. If your way of doing it is more solo, then get in front of the keys, get in front of a guitar, take the lessons, spend the time, put yourself out there on Instagram. If it wasn't for Noura and Mish putting themselves out there and making recording themselves playing together and playing alone, we would have never found each other. So, and also something that I know is the same for each and every single one of us. We've always wanted to be in a band, and you know, for some of us, this happened later in life than others. And the one thing that we kept saying when people would ask us, "Hey, are you in a band?" we would say, "No, we're not in a band yet." We wouldn't shut it down by saying, "No, we're not in a band. It's never going to happen," because it doesn't seem like it's going to happen now. So really hold on to that hope. Dream your reality into existence. This is what each and every single one of us has done, and yeah, it's all possible. As much of a far reality as it might seem, if you do the work, if you show up every day, if you keep a good head on your shoulders, you keep a good attitude, you will get there. And also, of course, if you lean on one another, then you will get there.
Well, listen, I know that you guys are doing amazing things and you've got a long way to go to carry on and take this out to the world. I wish you a lot of luck. I'll be the old guy out there pumping my fist when I see you in concert live. Looking forward to it very much. Mish, Haya, Noura, and of course Thing, all the best to you. On a side note, thumbs up to Spotify for supporting Syria as an artist in residence, helping them to grow as they break new ground and battle stereotypes. Well, talking of battles, Tyson Fury, whom I'd interviewed back in May, just before he narrowly lost his highly publicised Ring of Fire bout against the undefeated Alexander Usyk, was back for another round against the Ukrainian world champion, with the match rebranded Reignited this time. I headed back to Riyadh for another sit-down interview with the Gypsy King. And here's the quick round of word sparring I had with him at the end of our chat. You know, last time we spoke, we had the chance to do this 12 quick fire questions, where I asked you about competitions, who would win against who. This time, let's do an interesting one if we can. Okay. We do like 10 rounds of names which, when I say the name, if you can, give me a one-word description for that name. Yep. You want to try that? So, Alexander Usyk.
The cat.
Okay.
Rabbit.
3 words.
Just one then, rabbit.
Anthony Joshua.
Sausage.
All right. Eddie Hearn.
Fast.
Okay. I won't ask you to explain these just yet, but anyway, Turkey El Sheikh.
Excellent.
Okay. Donald Trump.
President.
Elon Musk.
Genius.
Muhammad Ali.
The greatest. Well, that's 2.
Mike Tyson.
Legend.
Okay, and then your dad, John Fury.
Papa.
Be careful with this last one. Your wife, Paris.
A witch.
We'll have to cut that one, I think.
That'd be all right.
Tyson Fury, thank you so
very
much. Really, what a pleasure.
All the best. Thanks
Always.
again.
Thank you, sir.
All the best.
Sadly for Tyson Fury, this rematch had a similar outcome to the last time, and Alexander Usyk remains undefeated. Meanwhile, a serious issue was being debated in Britain as it faced an historic parliamentary vote to decide on legalising assisted dying in England and Wales. The bill passed following a very sensitive and respectful debate, but it still faces further scrutiny, and that could mean it being passed into law, modified, or even rejected. We got 2 interesting perspectives on the topic. The first is from the family of a veteran British TV celebrity broadcaster and activist. Esther Ranson commanded huge audiences for her show That's Life from the early 1970s into the 1990s. Now aged 84, she revealed that she's been diagnosed with late-stage terminal lung cancer and has signed up to the Swiss service Dignitas that assists people in choosing their date and time of death. Well, Dame Esther has ended up a public champion supporting assisted dying and was happy it passed the first debate in the British Parliament. Her daughter, Rebecca Wilcox, gave me a personal perspective on the issue. Rebecca, your mother's not known for doing anything half-heartedly. And apparently she contacted every member of parliament in the UK government before the debate. Is that the case?
Oh, yes, absolutely. She knew that she wasn't physically able to go to the debate. She sent me in her stead, and I sat at the top and sat on my hands and tried not to shout at people when I assumed that they were saying something that I disagreed with or she disagreed with me. And because she couldn't be there, she sent this heartfelt letter filled with comment and fact that she really hoped they would sit and listen to, because that's what she wanted. She wanted everybody in the room to listen to the other side, regardless of the point of view that you come into the room with. Listen to the other side and then make a choice. We know that the public are majority in favour of changing the rules around assisted dying. We just wanted that reflected in the room.
Now, Rebecca, your father, Desmond Wilcox, is also a renowned journalist and filmmaker. And I gather both he and your mother had touched on this subject in documentaries in the past. Tell us about that.
They were trailblazers. They would go where subjects hadn't gone before. They didn't mind talking about the things that were difficult. So it doesn't surprise me at all that they covered this subject. Most recently, Mum made a series called How to Have a Good Death. And it was a really interesting eye-opener for her. And I think paved the way for this campaign, because she saw people suffer in a way that was not palatable, for want of a better word, and could not be helped by palliative care. She saw people's shunts fall out, and she saw people's morphine drop off, and she saw people's pain surpass the opioid barrier. And I think that created a deep-seated belief in her that she did not want to go that way, that she wanted something far more peaceful. And my father felt the same way. He had a DNR, he had a do not resuscitate, that was very clear. And I remember in the hospital when he was dying, they were trying to resuscitate him, and Mom was screaming at me on the phone because she had popped home to change her outfit. Not out of it, that sounds ridiculous. She'd popped home to refresh herself because we'd been there a few hours, and unfortunately she wasn't there as he started crashing. So she's screaming at me on the phone that he has a DNR, he has a DNR. And I wasn't able to, or I couldn't, some reason it felt wrong for me to stop the medical process, but actually that's what he wanted. And I really hope that I would be brave enough to do that now. But he never wanted to have a catastrophic brain injury from lack of oxygen, which was what was happening, and therefore live in a vegetative state. He wanted to have a good death, which is what the Health and Social Care Select Committee report talked about. And Mum absolutely echoed that. So their work throughout their lives always touched on difficult subjects and brilliant people talking about difficult things. And I'm not surprised they ended up with the decisions they ended up with.
It was a very difficult situation, of course, you found yourself in, and there are many perspectives on this subject, with some people very, very heavily opposed to it. They see it as assisted suicide, rather than just assisted dying. And I wonder, your mother would have heard a number of these arguments. Was she ever swayed by some of these viewpoints? Did it affect her in any way?
She has listened. She has listened. What she asked of the MPs to listen to her point of view, she has listened to other people. Otherwise, she is not the fair and rational woman that we know and love. She absolutely understands that people have differing points of view, that some people see that there's a sanctity of life, that some people see that there could be a coercive nature to this, that vulnerable elements of our society could be put at risk. But she and I have both looked through all the evidence and know that choice, according to the bill that has been set out, has an amazing set of safeguards around it. The safeguards are the cornerstone of this bill. At the moment, there aren't safeguards. At the moment, we're sort of living in a weird Wild West because nobody knows what to do and the law is a mess. So things can happen without regulation, whereas this would bring in regulation and legislation, and people would be able to monitor it very closely. I mean, it asks for the person that's asking to have an assisted death to apply 8 separate times. And those 8 separate times are scrutinised by doctors and lawyers or judges, depending upon how it proceeds with the committee stages. So there was no way that we didn't listen to other people's point of view, but the thing that kept coming back to us was this is choice, and faith is always choice. And I have many family members who are strong believers in the sanctity of life, but they would never believe that my mum should live in suffering and a prolonged existence just because of their faith.
It's interesting, Rebecca, you raised that issue of safeguards, the safeguards that are there already, and the fact some are worried of the bill, allowing the scope to widen. And I wonder, if you could see any other potential safeguards that might really add another lock to the idea that the bill couldn't go any wider.
Well, I'm not a lawmaker. I'm not very well versed in politics. I've come to this very green, and it's been a very steep education for me in how contrary points of view can cause such emotive arguments. I've had a lot of threats against my life, against my family's safety, just because I believe in choice at the end of this world. So at the end of your life. So it's an interesting one for me that you talk about safeguards when the people that are throwing around the violent terms are usually on the opposite side to me. We turn up to every debate, every campaign, every rally. I'm alongside a campaign called Dignity in Dying, and that's exactly how we try and proceed at all these rallies, with dignity, with compassion, with empathy, and we're hugging each other and we're chatting to each other. And I'm alongside people who are really suffering from very serious terminal diagnoses, including this wonderful woman called Sophie who has stage 4 terminal breast cancer and is allergic to opioids. So at the end of her life, she sees nothing but pain. She cannot have any pain relief. So how does the gentle death of palliative care work for someone like her? With the safeguards that we want, I think this is the most safe bill. In fact, there have been criticisms of it for having too many safeguards. I think at the moment, with the country not decided, with a bit of a rift going on, even though the majority are in favour of it, I think it's good to proceed with this level of safety at this time.
Veteran Member of Parliament Barry Gardiner voted against the bill, despite understanding the perspective of those campaigning for it. He explained to me how and why he made his choice.
I think it's important that we recognise that when we're legislating, we are not simply expressing our own personal preference. And this was the fundamental internal conflict that I had with myself, because I could envisage myself being in that situation as outlined in this bill, with perhaps 6 months yet to live, with a terminal disease, and depending on the nature of that disease, perhaps wanting to avail myself of what this law would propose, which is to be able to have an assisted death. So at a personal level, I could see that. And I also listened very carefully to the stories of many of my colleagues and some of my constituents whose family members had been in that position, but hadn't been able to avail themselves of an assisted death. Some who'd taken their own life, but hadn't been able to have their final goodbyes with their family, because that would have implicated their family in assisting suicide, which is a criminal offense. So I had to think very hard about, was it my role to enact a law which would certainly bring comfort and relief to those people, or was it my role as a parliamentarian to pass legislation for the whole of society? And my fear was that if we passed the legislation that would undeniably bring that comfort and relief for so many, but I believe it would also have jeopardized those people who were, yes, in the situation at the end of their life with 6 months yet to live, but who thought, am I too much of a burden on my family? Should I just now opt for an early death? Is my living for another 6 months in this care home or with this care support going to eat so much up of the inheritance that my grandchildren might have on my death that I'm denying them their inheritance? And those are considerations that nobody at the end of their life should have to take into account.
Now, you're referring to guilt.
Misplaced guilt. because there is no guilt in living. You know, you're not guilty for being alive. You are a valued, a treasured human being. And where we lose our capacity to see each other as that, then our society really has changed fundamentally.
But Mr. Gardner, in terms of not having somewhere to go, there are people such as the famous British broadcaster Esther Ranson, who's in her mid-80s and suffering from lung cancer, who said if she doesn't have the option in the UK, she'll go to Switzerland, to Dignitas, an organisation that does offer assisted dying. So by not giving them the option in the UK, aren't you simply driving them out?
Well, no, it doesn't force them out, but what it does, unfortunately, and here I feel this very keenly, the point that you make, because as Esther Ranson wrote to me, as she did to many MPs, and her own witness, her own testimony of her situation was very powerful. And she made the point, I have the luxury, I am wealthy enough to be able to go to Switzerland, but there are people who are not. And therefore, at the moment, as the law stands, as a rich person, I can avail myself of the remedy that I want. I can exercise the choice that I wish to make, but a poor person cannot. And that's a very powerful argument. But as I say, I don't think it overrides the responsibility that I certainly felt to legislate for everyone in society and not just for those who felt themselves in that particular situation as wanting to have the assisted death.
Supporters of the bill, such as MP Kim Leadbeater, point to the safeguards they tried to build in, such as 2 doctors, a judge, 6 months of life expectancy, and heavy jail sentences for those who might ill-advise or coerce someone into assisted dying. So you had talked about wanting another level of assurance. What would that be?
I think there was a recognition, not just from myself, but from others, that there needed to be additional safeguards. For example, the situation of the judge signing it off, that is really a technical formality. It's not there's no investigative powers that the judge has. He simply has to check whether 2 doctors have agreed. I'm afraid that my view on the way in which the medical profession might operate in this is that it is not even doctors who spoke in the debate accepted that 6 months was a very movable feast. Sometimes they give a prognosis and that prognosis is entirely wrong. I think there was a concern that we would develop into 2 sets of doctors, those who were known to favor assisted dying and those who were not. And if you wanted that, you simply went to the ones who would sign you off without too much questioning. And I think that is, it was a safeguard, but I don't think it was an adequate safeguard.
Well, we'll keep an eye on that debate in the UK as it continues into 2025. On a lighter note, while I was in Washington, D.C. covering the post-election period and the prospect of another Trump presidency, my executive producer and long-suffering friend, Neil Curry, took it upon himself to put the mood of the US elections into a rather clever poem. Neil's always had a way with words, and that was evident as he stood in front of the Capitol's reflecting pool to personally recite his poem, Election Reflections.
November in Washington, just 1 week on from an impact whose dusty cloud darkened the sun in the eyes of those seeking a different outcome. While the victors, elated in joy, celebrated, the change long awaited had finally come. In the hours before the decision is made, for some the hopes rise, yet for others they fade. Jubilation, sensation, salvation and cheers, tribulation, trepidation, frustration and tears. A zero-sum game for the forthcoming years. Election officials, the target of ire, conducted their counting behind the barbed wire. With careful precision, the electoral decision, uncontested, accepted, and free from derision, enabled the hopes of a tranquil transition. The jubilant victors soon take to the stage. The defeated, depleted walk home without rage. Half the nation elated, the other depressed, but no riots are mounted, no signs of unrest. Democracy, questioned, yet rose to the test. Pathologists sharpen political tools. Post-mortems begin by the usual rules. Pondering pundits with scapegoats to seize. Panelists, pollsters now sink to their knees, while Lichtman considers his new tarnished keys. World leaders are queuing to bend at the knee. To honour the victor, not all could foresee. Renewing old friendships, regretting misdeeds, offering to service the president's needs. Past insults erased, for forgiveness they plead. Will promises made equal promises kept? Will political rivals be shown some respect? Belligerent language softened and sealed. Salvation, moderation, return to the field. Can a nation divided be finally healed? Washingtonian dogs still need to be walked. Political chatter still needs to be talked. Coffee brewed up and scrambled eggs downed. On the National Mall there are leaves to be browned and cover the Capitol's historic ground. And the sun still shines on the Capitol pool, glinting eyes squinting like some precious jewel. The ripples now calming, disarming some fears of the journey ahead to the forthcoming years. The tsunami receding, for now, it appears.
Executive producer Neil Curry there, summing up the outcome of a very tense year of campaigning for the US presidency. Now, perhaps one of the most intriguing stories of 2024 was how a 65-year-old British museum curator in Leeds, Northern England, achieved more than 10 million TikTok views for his video tour of the Royal Armouries, using Gen Z language. Mark Murray-Flutter, now a social media star, and the museum's communication officer, Katie Glover, explained the origins of this rather unusual video.
Brat summer is over, bestie. It's time to enter your historical era. The Royal Armouries is the most Sigma day out in Leeds. No cap. What are you waiting for? The vibes are immaculate. Enjoy a goated day out. Slay.
Katie and Mark, really good to have you both on. And Katie, you're the genius behind this idea. And I'm wondering, how did you come up with it and how did you think Mark would react?
So I was actually away from work when this trend sort of started, and it was started by a B&B in Oxfordshire, actually. And I'd seen it was getting a little bit of traction, and I thought I need to get back to work. As soon as I come back from my holiday, I want to do this trend. So I started thinking up how we could tailor it to our collection and make it a bit more like historical. And Mark had been suggested to me by another colleague, and we thought absolutely he's got the perfect cadence in his voice for it. He's a very distinguished gentleman, so he's the perfect kind of foil to what we're trying to have him do. I really wasn't sure if Mark would be up for it or not. I'd hoped he would, but he was really enthusiastic, so that was always an added bonus.
That's it, Mark. I was going to ask what your initial reaction was to Katie's proposal.
Oh, I was actually very intrigued, and I thought this might be actually good fun. Something I've never done before. And believe it or not, I was kind of looking forward to learning a new language.
It is. And I wonder if you had any hesitation or worries, Mark?
No, not really, no. No, I trust my colleagues.
Katie, what was it like working with Mark on the recording?
Oh, it was so much fun. Yeah, we did it on, I think it was a Friday morning, just before the museum opened, and it was just a laugh. He was actually amazing and did most of them in one take, but it was really fun behind the scenes, kind of explaining what the different things meant, choosing where we were going to film each shot. It only took us about, 20 minutes, and yeah, we enjoyed it a lot, both of us, I think.
I'm surprised.
From my perspective...
Go ahead, Mark.
Sorry, Riz. From my perspective, my problem was trying to understand the context in which these new words were being used. Because when you speak about something or describe something, you can usually understand what those words are referring to. So I was having to learn a contextualization, a context for these new phrases and words. This is the largest display of arms and armour since the 19th century very based. Chat, this diorama is sending me. Dioramas are lit.
Mark Murray-Flutter really did slay. While on the subject of Gen Z language, I was keen to point out that in 2023, the Oxford University Press's word of the year was Riz, with 2 Zs, or Zs, as they say in America. I even have a t-shirt to celebrate it. I invited our social media producer Matty Potter to the programme to discuss how the English language changes in the hands of younger generations. And then he insisted that I end that show in Gen Z language.
Even if it's not considered too cool for someone my age to be using these Gen Z words, I could have a go. So, yeah, so nevertheless, I've asked you to help me prepare a script to close the show, which could be understood by people under 27. I may live to regret this, but thanks for your time and advice, Matty, because I'm going to try this out and we'll see how it goes.
Can't wait.
All right, cheers. Thank you. Man, that episode just hit different, no cap. We spoke to a litty female band from Saudi with more aura than Duke Dennis, no glaze. Spotify put us on with some fire data about the Spotify Wrapped results, W Spotify in the chat, and we spoke to the low-key geniuses behind the Bus in Brain Rot Leeds Armory vid. And finally, Matty Potter, who's just a chill guy who does our social media, teaches us NPCs, the do's and don'ts of speaking Gen Z. Bro thinks he's fluent. Well, that's enough yapping from me. Blood thinks it's a Kai Cenat Sabathon. Shout out the mafia. I've been the Riz Khan, and we'll see you soon.
That was great.
Did it work?
That was great. What have I created? What have I created? I created a monster.
Slay.
I still have no clue what I said. That's it for this edition of our show, looking back on a busy and often fun-filled 2024. We look forward to having you with us for the show throughout 2025. I'm Riz Khan. From me and the team, a very happy new year. See you soon.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson, and with the holiday season upon us, we've decided to take a look back at some of the highlights from the last few weeks. Hello and welcome to the programme. We begin with the news that the French Prime Minister Michel Barnier officially handed in his resignation during a meeting with the French President Emmanuel Macron earlier on today at the Élysée Palace. Well, Barnier's minority government collapsed on Wednesday due to a no-confidence vote over a controversial budget proposal, making him the first Prime Minister in 60 years to be removed by such a vote just 3 months into his term. Well, France's parliament is deeply divided, and no fresh elections are permitted until July of next year. Well, for more analysis, so we can speak now to the French Senator Nathalie Goulet. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. It looks like France is in a state of political and financial chaos. How has it come to this point?
Well, you know that last June, the president decided to recall parliamentary election. And as a result of those parliamentary election, we didn't have any clear majority. So the situation now is that the extreme left came together with the extreme right and just make the government fall. As simple as that.
So what happens now? Who's going to succeed Michel Barnier as Prime Minister?
Well, my deep wish would be that Michel Barnier succeed at himself. But I don't know. The president now is going to have a lot of consultation. I would like to remind you that last time it took almost for more than 3 weeks to have a prime minister. So I hope that he will appoint a new prime minister very, very soon so we can continue to vote the budget, because right now we don't have any parliamentary work because we don't have a government anymore.
But will Barnier stay on as caretaker prime minister until a new prime minister is found? And can he stay on as... But can he stay on as caretaker prime minister until, for example, next July, when there are fresh parliamentary elections?
No. That is not possible. That is just for a short period of time, the time that the president will appoint somebody else or himself again. You know, it's very possible. I mean, technically, the president can appoint him again to form a new government. That is very possible. Technically, it's open, but I don't think it will be the case, unfortunately.
Okay, and in terms of candidates, who's on the short list, do you think?
Well, we have a lot. You know, you always have candidates for the job, and then when they are appointed, they don't make it anymore. You know, it's very common everywhere on earth. So we have Mr. Le Cornu, who was Minister of Defense. We have François Bayrou, who is an old friend of the president and old character of the French political landscape. We have Bruno Retailleau, who was previously Minister of Interior. He's he's an excellent minister with a lot of will to do the best for the country. So we have a lot of candidates. We always have a lot of candidates, you know, that happens, as I told you, everywhere.
I mean, isn't the next Prime Minister just going to face exactly the same problems that Barnier faced, in particular this issue of the budget?
Well, the issue of the budget is not really the issue. The issue is that you have a technician of the chaos in this Assemblée Nationale. You have people who just want to create a chaos. So whatever will be the subject, you know, when you want to kill your dog, you just say that he's enraged. So I think that whatever will be the subject, they will always find an alibi to create this kind of chaos. The budget is not an alibi. And then they blackmail the prime minister, and the prime minister cannot be blackmailed in a democracy.
But this budget is extremely unpopular with the French public. Why is that? Don't they realise that it's not for fun that President Macron would put a budget like that on his radar? He sees it as a necessity for France in the longer term. Don't the people understand that?
No, I'm in a finance committee, and the budget is not so bad. The problem is that we have a huge deficit, and we have to reduce it. So we have to cut measure. But this budget was not so bad. It's just that the communication around it and what the extreme left or extreme right did about this budget gave this bad impression. But the budget is not so bad regarding the huge debt that France have. So, I mean, when you own money, you know, when the budget of the interest of the debt is almost equivalent to the budget of the defense, it's more than 50 billion euro a year. So maybe you have to pay attention. And then we have European Union who ask her precisely to pay attention to this huge deficit. So the budget is not so bad. As I told you, for me, it's just an alibi.
Yeah, Marine Le Pen, the leader of the far-right National Rally, said that the budget was toxic for the French people.
She is toxic for the French people. She is more toxic than any budget.
She also said that all of this was a problem of Emmanuel Macron's making. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that the president didn't use the right proceedings, that he did very bad to recall a parliamentary election last year. Last summer, it was a big, huge mistake. But then Mrs. Le Pen is not saying anything about the effort that all of French taxpayers did during COVID to support the company, to support the people, to solve this pandemic, and the effort that they did for the people to pay last taxes, and all the effort that has been done last year and the year before. She just sees the dark side of the history.
France hasn't found itself.
But the extreme left is the same.
Okay, and I was just going to say France hasn't found itself in a situation like this where a prime minister has been toppled by a no-confidence vote since 1962, when Pompidou's government lost a confidence vote. There are more than 2 years left of President Macron's term. Do you think he can survive this?
I think that we need a good fortune teller. But I think the situation will be very, very difficult because, you know, the people who are used to blackmail, if they blackmail once, they will blackmail again, whoever will be prime minister. And then, as I told you, you have some extreme left technician of chaos, and whoever will be prime minister, they will jump on it and on him and try to jeopardize the situation. So I don't know what kind of magic rabbit will come out of the presidential hat as a prime minister, but we wish him a very good luck.
But going back to this concept of the president surviving this political storm, according to two opinion polls, one I saw said 54% of the French public want Emmanuel Macron to resign right now. Another poll said 64% of the French public want Emmanuel Macron to resign right now. I mean, can we really not rule out early presidential elections?
You know, polls are not making a politic. But what I think is that the people are scared. They are scared of what they hear. They are scared of strikes. They are scared of the instability. And then they blame the president for it. And so if the president is not able to deal with that, they want the president to change. So the results that you just mentioned are very logical regarding the situation.
And given, as you said, this gamble of the elections in July backfired on President Macron, I mean, it's very difficult for the French public to blame anyone but him, isn't it?
You know, everybody is blaming him, even his very close team, because the closer people were not aware about this situation that he will recall election after the European election. It's a drastic and dramatic mistake. Nobody can say something else, but now we have to deal with the situation. And France is a big country. We are a permanent member of the Security Council. We have international issue. We have a financial issue. We have social issue, and we need a government to deal with. So we need to be responsible. We need to have a solution which will fit till the next presidential election. That is our task now for member of the parliament.
But this is really worrying for the whole of Europe, isn't it? Because France and Germany are supposed to be the two strong leaders in Europe. We've got a situation where both of them are looking politically extremely fragile, aren't they?
Sure, it's very difficult. It's very difficult because we miss a strong leadership. We don't have a strong leadership in Europe. We don't have this couple, France and Germany together as we used to have in the past. Then we had the Brexit, and then we have the rest of the world turning, and they are not waiting for us to move ahead. So it's a very, very, very difficult situation and very fragile. I do agree.
Senator, I know you have to go.
And I'm very sorry for that.
In a couple of words, what do you think this means for France's standing on the international stage?
Well, I hope that we will have a solution very soon because we have to keep our place in the international community. But I think that that makes us very weak and not trustable at all. So I think that we will have to solve this fact, and the people have to put a general interest on the table instead of their own interest. That is my wish for today.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much. French Senator Nathalie Goulet, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
This agreement should also open the path for a ceasefire too long awaited with regards to the incomparable suffering of the population in Gaza. The restoration of Lebanon's sovereignty requires the immediate election of a president of the republic, capable of uniting the Lebanese through the formation of a strong and representative government, and the adoption of the reforms necessary for the country's economic and financial recovery.
The French president speaking there. Well, for more, we can speak now to David Hale, former U.S. ambassador to Lebanon and former U.S. special envoy for peace in the Middle East under President Barack Obama. Thank you so much for joining us. I just want to ask you about these U.S.-mediated talks. Something of an achievement, some are saying, for the outgoing Biden administration. To whom do you give credit for the outcome of these talks?
Well, obviously, the administration worked very hard, led by Amos Hochstein, who is the envoy charged with trying to come up with this agreement. But I think really, to answer your question, it's the achievement of Israel to have done so much to basically diminish Hezbollah's power and bring it to a point where Hezbollah was desperate, I think, for an end to the fighting. We heard we heard Netanyahu say the other day that this is a pause, and frankly, they want to refocus their energies on the main goal, which is Iran. And that, of course, is going to be the big issue for the new incoming Trump administration.
But some people are saying in Lebanon and in Iran, this is a triumph for Hezbollah, that this is an admission of defeat by Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, are there really any winners and losers here?
Well, time will tell. Obviously, Hezbollah is going to put the best face on this that it can, and the TV images clearly show a sense of celebration among its people. And there is a countervailing view among the anti-Hezbollah Lebanese, at least those I'm in touch with, who feel very despondent. But just at a moment when there was the possibility of basically eliminating Hezbollah's military as well as political influence in Lebanon, that opportunity has now been snatched away because of this ceasefire. I would focus less on the arrangements that are going to be made in South Lebanon, which are unlikely to be adequate. They never have been before in the last 40 years of this conflict. But what are we all going to do about Iran? And if the power equation in the Middle East shifts back against Iran, then the elements in Lebanon that want a free, independent country will be reinforced.
But Iran doesn't sound like it's got any intention of shifting its focus away from Lebanon. We've just heard from Tehran it will show firm support for the Lebanese government, the nation, and for resistance. I mean, that doesn't sound particularly conciliatory, does it?
No, and again, I would expect this to be the case. I think the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards of Iran, are basically running Hezbollah now on a day-to-day basis and continues their support. And as far as I can tell, we don't have a lot of the details of the ceasefire agreement, but nothing's going to stop Iran from continuing to supply weapons and money and rhetorical support to Hezbollah, which, unless we intervene over time, will be able to regain its strength.
Some in Israel do not support this deal that's been put in place with Lebanon. We've heard from Itamar Ben-Gvir saying we're missing a historic opportunity to strike Hezbollah hard, bring them to their knees. I'm just wondering how widely shared you think that opinion is in Washington.
Oh, I don't think it's widely shared here. Obviously, we don't have in Washington the level of attention on the details in Lebanon in the way that the Israeli public and leadership does. I think, frankly, Israel had done about as much as it could have done militarily to counter Hezbollah. This was going to come to an end at some point. Again, I don't want to keep repeating myself, but the real question is, what are we going to do now to continue to press the advantages against Iran that the Israeli operations have created? How can we rebalance the power equation in the Middle East? That's the key question for the Trump administration.
Indeed. Just going back to the deal itself, it's a 60-day truce. What's your understanding of what happens when the 60 days are up?
Well, I guess it's no coincidence, but in 60 days is also when we're going to have a new administration coming into office. During this period, the expectation, I believe, is the Israelis will gradually withdraw from South Lebanon. The Hezbollah is likely to continue to claim that Israel remains an occupation of a slender slice of Lebanese territory, which internationally is not recognized, but which Hezbollah uses as a pretext to maintain its so-called resistance. I also think that, frankly, UNIFIL doesn't have the authority by the Security Council to use force against Hezbollah, and nor will this monitoring group that has been discussed be on the ground. So there's really nothing that's going to stop the Hezbollah from putting people back in close proximity of Israel, except the Lebanese army. And the problem with the Lebanese army is not its military capacity, but the political will. It reflects the sectarian makeup of the country and would be loath to put itself in a confrontational position with Hezbollah because of the risk of breaking the army apart. So there's there are a lot of gaps in this agreement that I think Hezbollah will be exploiting, just as they did in 2006 when the last war ended.
But the United States and France have said they're going to help the Lebanese army. What do you understand as being their role? How are they going to support this army and make sure that it actually does a role that doesn't actually then leave a void that gets filled by Hezbollah?
Well, any support for the army is welcome. And we've been, along primarily with the British, doing a great deal to train and equip the Lebanese army. But the flaw in the thinking, I think, is to believe that it's a question of military capacity. It's not. It is a problem of political will. And so we've been supporting the Lebanese army so that there's an alternative, a state-run, state-led, accountable army as an alternative to this foreign-backed militia, Hezbollah, not to confront Hezbollah. That will only come about through a political process. And then we can hopefully point to the Lebanese army as a legitimate alternative to Hezbollah. We're not there yet. There has been nothing that I have seen to suggest that there's any change in the political equation in Lebanon. So it would be premature to believe, frankly, that the Lebanese army's military capacity will make the difference.
It's interesting that Hezbollah had said that they wouldn't cease hostilities until the fighting stopped in Gaza. The fighting continues in Gaza, and yet Hezbollah has agreed to this cessation of hostilities. I'm just wondering why you think they've changed their tune. I mean, is that a sign of weakness and serious degradation, as perhaps Israel might argue?
Yes, and it's an absolute sign of desperation. And there's nothing Hezbollah and Iran wanted more than this ceasefire. So you can draw whatever lessons you want from that or conclusions from that. But they're down, but they're not out. And this ceasefire does give them the opportunity to regain at least some of the strength that they've lost over the last year.
And just looking more broadly at the region, I mean, do you think perhaps credit can be given as well to the Biden administration for the fact that this war did not actually spread further than many had feared it might? It didn't become the regional war that some had feared it might become. Do you think credit is due there for the ability of the Secretary of State to contain it to some extent?
Well, I'm not sure I would agree that it was relatively contained. Obviously, I suppose it could have been worse, but we've had Iranian-directed violence directed at Israel and the United States and its allies and our shipping interests from the Red Sea to Gaza to Lebanon to Iraq. And Iran continues to dominate, frankly, the situation in Baghdad, Beirut, Damascus, and Sana'a. So we are in a regional contest here. It could have gotten hotter and it could still get hotter. But frankly, as a great power, if we're not prepared to stand up to the Iranians, they're going to continue to call the shots in the Middle East. And there'll be another October 7 before you know it, unless we come up with a game plan that's actually going to really, really press the advantages that Israel has gained against Iran.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. David Hale, we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Well, for more analysis, I'm joined now by Mick Mulvaney, the former Chief of Staff to the US President-elect Donald Trump. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, Mr. Mulvaney. I just want to ask you, first of all, to whom do we give the most credit, do you think? Who deserves the credit for bringing this deal about, which has resulted in a ceasefire in Lebanon?
Well, Tom, thanks for having me. I think you sort of anticipate the answer by your question, which is everyone will always seek to take credit. There's no question about that. My guess is Donald Trump, sitting in Mar-a-Lago here this week, will be making the case, and in fact is making the case that one of the reasons this deal got cut is that Hezbollah was afraid of what he might do when he comes into office in January. At the same time, I'm sure the Biden administration will take credit for doing the hard work necessary to get it done. I think at the end of the day, very few people here really care that much about who takes the credit. We're just glad that the deal was arranged.
Okay, so you would say it's fair to say, therefore, something of a parting victory for the outgoing Biden administration, nevertheless?
Look, I remember back in 1979 when after Ronald Reagan got elected, shortly thereafter, the Iranians released the American hostages. Reagan took credit. Carter took credit. There's no, success has many mothers and failure is an orphan. So I don't think that many people here outside of the immediate Trump circle and the immediate Biden circle are worried that much about who gets the credit.
Okay, this is, of course, a 60-day truce, and we all know that in 60 days from now there'll be a new administration in the White House. And I just wonder what you think the return of Donald Trump, and I know you've already touched on it briefly, but what do you think his return will mean specifically for this deal?
Well, for this deal and for the broader deal, Trump is going to be a lot more aggressive, I think, than Biden is. Certainly his language will be more aggressive. We know that from his first term in office. But he is not afraid to play at a little bit higher stakes. And I think he's arguably a little bit more aligned with Israel than Joe Biden was. In fact, I think certainly you could make that case. So how the immediate swearing in of Donald Trump takes place in January, which takes place in January, will affect the outcome. It sort of remains to be seen. But generally speaking, I think that Donald Trump is going to be tougher on Iran than Joe Biden was.
Yeah, there is a lot of speculation that now the Lebanon problem is resolved, at least for the next 60 days. Perhaps attention will shift to Gaza and, as you say as well, to Iran. And I just wonder what specifically on Iran Mr. Trump might have in store.
Well, look, face it, we look at least the Republicans in this country, not the least of which Donald Trump, look at Hezbollah and Hamas through the lens of Iran. Without Iran's influence, Hamas and Hezbollah would not be nearly the difficulties that they are. So I think you can expect a much tougher position on the Iranian nuclear program. That's been proven to be the case already. We had a very soft, sort of dovish attitude towards Iran under the Obama administration. It was much more hawkish under Donald Trump in his first administration, a little bit more to the other extreme with Joe Biden. Now the pendulum will be swinging back again with Donald Trump. So if you ask the general question, what will Donald Trump be like on Iran, on Hezbollah, on Hamas in his second term? The answer is pretty much the same as the first.
Okay, and with regards to Gaza, how hopeful are you that now, as I said, Lebanon is resolved? Perhaps normal life can start being rebuilt for the Lebanese people. What do you see happening for the people of Gaza?
Well, certainly resolving the issue in Lebanon will make Gaza simpler. I don't want to use easier because it's still a very difficult situation, and it's going to continue to be. But at least now there's only one sort of variable in the conversation. If you can put the Lebanese Hezbollah issue to bed for at least 60 days, and I'm hoping that it lasts longer than that, then you can focus all of our attention here in the U.S. And in your part of the world towards Gaza. Whether or not Hamas is willing to make the sacrifices necessary or make the agreements necessary in order to get peace remains to be seen. But now they'll be back out on their own again, which I think puts the Israelis in a much better position.
Now, you'd know the answer to this question, and I'm curious to know what you think. But don't foreign policy issues invariably look much easier to an administration in opposition than they do to the actual administration that's in office? Because, of course, the administration in office has access to material, to intelligence reports that people outside the administration don't have. Do you think that is the case? And do you think perhaps the reality of the situation is quite different from how it may appear to a party in opposition, i.e. on the campaign trail for Donald Trump and his party?
Sure, I think that's the case for not just global issues, matters of foreign policy, but for most issues. Inflation looks a lot more simple to you when you are in opposition than you are the ruling party, and that's not probably unique to the United States of America. But certainly the issue in Gaza is going to continue to be complicated. Might it be simplified a little bit for purposes of campaigns? Absolutely. There's no question about that. I don't think the average voting American has the time or the interest to get down into every little detail about what's happening in Gaza. So campaigning necessarily probably simplifies that a little bit. But to your point, yes, when you are in office, things are probably a little bit more complicated, and you are playing for keeps. You're playing with real stakes, as we say in the United States. When you're in opposition on the outside looking in, you can be as critical as you want to without much sort of real world implications. But when you're the party in charge, you're playing with real money.
I'd just like to ask you, Mr. Mulvaney, about the new US ambassador to Israel, Mick Huckabee. And I'd just like to ask you what you think he and his appointment will bring to the region.
Yeah, I've talked to Mr. Governor Huckabee. He was the former governor of the state of Arkansas, ran for president. I know him relatively well. I'm close with his daughter. She and I work together in the White House. And I've talked to him briefly since his designation as the future U.S. ambassador. I think he brings some clarity of purpose, some clarity of policy, but most importantly, and this applies, I think, around the world, he has a direct line of communication into the White House. I was a special envoy in Northern Ireland after my term in the White House, and one of the things that I thought was the most valuable to me as an envoy of my government, as a member of the diplomatic corps, was to be able to pick up the phone and call the President of the United States directly. And Mike Huckabee will have that. That type of thing makes decision-making quicker, perhaps more effective, and also allows the communication to be clearer and crisper with less less chance of miscommunication and so forth. So I think it's an excellent pick. I've talked to to various communities here in this group, in this country, including some of the Arab American groups and the Israeli American groups, and generally they seem pleased with the decision. Mr. Huckabee has a great deal of credibility, especially within the White House, and I think will make an excellent ambassador.
And I'd like to just ask you lastly about the other nominees in the incoming Trump administration, particularly those with a foreign policy portfolio, and what you think they mean for specifically the Middle East.
It's a fascinating sort of process, and we saw this a little bit in the first iteration of the Trump administration, in that Trump likes to surround himself with people who disagree with him and disagree with each other. And disagreement is not to be confused with disloyalty. He's hiring very loyal people. Every president does. But there are people who coming into the White House who see the world generally differently than he does. Marco Rubio, the incoming Secretary of State, would be considered to be more of a neoconservative sort of personality. The same could be said of an incoming national security advisor. This was true, by the way, in the first administration when President Trump brought in John Bolton, who didn't agree with the president on a lot of different things, but the president valued his input into the communication. So what you're going to see again in the second version of Trump is a variety of perspectives inside the White House. There will be people who will be more neoconservative when it comes to foreign policy, those who will be more non-interventionist. There will be folks who are fiercely pro-Israel and folks who are more neutral on issues that happen in the Gulf and so forth. So you'll see a variety of issues, a variety of perspectives brought to the table. And I think that's reflective of the people he's naming so far to the cabinet.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time today. Mick Mulvaney, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Tom.
Well, I'm joined now by Kurt Volker, who is the former US ambassador to NATO, and also the former US special representative for Ukraine negotiations under President Donald Trump. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. You were in that position during the years 2017 to 2019 as the special negotiator. I just want to ask you, first of all, about these embassy threats. What's your understanding of what's going on here?
Well, because of the Biden administration's decision to lift the restrictions on the use of ATACMS so that they can be used at longer range, which is a restriction that should have never been invented to begin with, they're now concerned that there might be Russian counterattacks or Russian escalation. There are, of course, Russian attacks on Kyiv and other major Ukrainian cities every single night. So this is nothing particularly new. But I guess they had some intelligence that a big one would come after this, so they decided as a matter of caution just to close the embassy. I do have to say, however, I think it would be very unwise and very unlikely that Russia would deliberately attack a U.S. embassy.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about these ATACMS, because as you say, and as you've said in other interviews, Ukraine should have been given them long ago. You've suggested that these weapons might somehow bring President Putin to the negotiating table. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what did you mean by that?
Yeah, that's not quite the way I put it. What they will do is force Russia to react. Russia's still going to attack Ukraine. No one should have any illusions about that. They've been attacking Ukraine for nearly 3 years in a row now, so they're not going to change. But it will allow Ukraine to hit back at a greater distance, with precision against where the Russians are attacking from, against fuel, ammunition, supply depots. So it's going to complicate Russia's effort. And I think we're going into a phase right now where Putin is realizing that his own military is in a relatively weak position. He doesn't have the personnel to refill the ranks. He's getting them from North Korea. He doesn't have the artillery shells. He's getting those from North Korea. He doesn't have the drones. He's getting those from Iran. But I think he knows his window is limited here. So he's going to try to grab as much as he can now during this presidential transition, on the expectation that there will have to be some kind of settlement or at least stabilization of the conflict next year once Trump is in office.
We'll come on to that in just a moment, looking ahead towards the Trump administration. But in terms of how Russia responds, are you not concerned at this stage that this, which is described as a massive escalation, i.e. the supply of these ATACMS to Ukraine, might trigger some sort of major response?
Yeah, it is. It makes me laugh to hear the Russians call this a massive escalation. Russia has been attacking Ukraine with long-range missiles, with drones, with ballistic missiles, everything you can imagine for nearly 3 years now. They've been abducting children. They've been deliberately targeting civilians in civilian areas. They've been trying to knock out the heat and the electricity so that people suffer through the winter. That is all just incredibly outrageous behavior. And then here we take a self-imposed limit of only firing a certain number of kilometers into Russian, or not even into Russian territory, because that was a gesture toward Russia, and we removed that, and now they're somehow, grievously offended. It is funny how the Russians are able to twist this that way.
Yeah, I mean, just listening to what you're saying and, quite dramatic language, as you say, Moscow has been using with regards to the provision of these weapons to Ukraine. I mean, there does seem to be, doesn't there? Of course, with these veiled threats and the possibility of attacks on embassies in Kyiv, it seems there's a strong sort of psychological dimension to Russia's war effort.
That's exactly right. You put your finger on it. They are trying to get inside our heads to deter us from taking actions that we're capable of. And one of the reasons for that is because it has worked in the past, so they want to keep doing it. Another reason is that they are not capable of escalating. They don't have the troops. They don't have the ammunition. It's not as if Russia is attacking Ukraine half-heartedly right now and holding back its main effort. Quite the contrary. They are losing up to 1,500 people a day on the front line, striving as hard as they can to take just inches of territory. They don't have the capability to escalate, but they want us to think they do so that we back down.
As well as thinking that perhaps the delivery of the ATACMS was rather late in the day, I've also heard you quoted as saying, why not just give this weaponry, or words to this effect, why not just hand over this weaponry quietly, perhaps with a little bit less fanfare, less of an announcement? And I'm just wondering, what is the point of announcing that you're handing over weapons to Ukraine? Why does Washington do that, as opposed to just, as you say?
It's a great question. From a military or a political strategic standpoint, it makes no sense to announce these things. First off, we shouldn't have had the restriction to begin with. Secondly, if we're going to remove it, just remove it. You don't have to talk about it, just do it. And I guess they want to get credit domestically for doing it. I guess there may be some who think that this is fair to Russia, that as if there is a reason to be fair to Russia here because of what they're doing. But maybe they feel it's better to do that. Or maybe it's just the a lack of discipline in the administration that this leaks out as people start talking, even though it wasn't made in a formal White House announcement.
Okay, and so basically, other than irritating Washington and provoking quite dramatic sounding statements, it doesn't achieve anything.
Well, I think the Russian fiery rhetoric and expressions of grievous harm don't achieve anything. I think the use of these weapons at a longer range will have some impact in forcing Russia to adjust. And since they are still attacking Ukraine every day, anything that can be done to complicate their logistics, complicate their command and control, take out some ammunition depots, all those things are incrementally heading in the right direction.
Okay, so if all of this is about making the West frightened, comments like what we heard from the Russian Foreign Intelligence Chief, Sergei Narishkin, who says that Moscow will retaliate against NATO countries that facilitate long-range Ukrainian missile strikes against Russian territory, plus President Vladimir Putin revisiting the country's nuclear doctrine. You're saying we've got nothing particular to worry about here?
Right. I think this is the third time so far in the course of this Russian aggression against Ukraine that Russia has tweaked its nuclear doctrine somehow because they want to create fear in the West. The reality is that nuclear weapons use would not be in Russia's interest. Any strategic use would immediately get a strategic response and would be the end of Russia. Any tactical use would not achieve any military objectives and draw a conventional response against Russian forces doing it that the Russian military itself cannot tolerate. So I just don't see them escalating into nuclear weapons unless they feel that the Russian state itself is under threat. And then their nuclear doctrine would kick in, and I could see them using nuclear weapons. But the fact is that nobody is doing that. No one is threatening the Russian state. No one is trying to march toward Moscow. No one is bombing civilians in Moscow. So these are just threats aimed at influencing Western decision-making.
China sounds a bit worried. We've got a statement from China in response to the lowering of the threshold for a nuclear strike. China saying there must be restraints on all sides, calling for people to remain calm. I mean, do you see China playing potentially a useful role here at all?
Well, useful is a bit of an overstatement. I think that China does not, they certainly don't want to see nuclear weapons use. They also are not terribly comfortable with Russia's reckless waging of this war. It has united the West. It has exposed Russia as weak. And it is now, China is now being linked to Russia in ways that undercut China's own objectives of being seen as a legitimate power broker in East Asia. So I think the Chinese would be very happy if this war just went away.
Let's go back to what we were talking about a little earlier on. You mentioned the advent of the Trump administration in just under, well, exactly 2 months from now. And speaking in Prague in August, again, correct me if I'm wrong in paraphrasing you, but you said words to the effect that Donald Trump is serious about ending this war. And I just wonder how you think he's going to do this and how he's going to negotiate a deal and at what cost.
Yeah. So the key thing here, and what President Trump frequently refers to, is President Reagan's comment of peace through strength. He constantly points to President Biden as having been weak, and Putin and Iran and others having taken advantage of the United States because of America's weakness under Biden. The implication there is that he wants to show strength and change their behavior by being strong. I think what he will do in the case of Russia's attacks on Ukraine is call Putin, as he said he would, and tell Putin to end the war. Now, Putin will have demands, and I think Trump just needs to stay firm and say, you need to end the war, or else we are going to continue to give Ukraine all the weaponry and all the support that it needs on a lend-lease basis so they can borrow it and pay us back later. But you're going to find that this is not going to work out well for Russia. You need to end the war now. I think that Putin, for his own reasons, as we mentioned, their military is in a much weaker position than they want to admit. Their economy is in a much weaker position than they want to admit. And they're not going to be able to keep this up for years on end. So I think that Putin may actually be getting ready for that kind of conversation as well and agreeing to take a pause in the war. Now, I don't believe that he would give up on his objectives, It would just be a matter of taking a break in the fighting for a while. But we would need to use that break to then stabilize the conflict, strengthen Ukraine, provide permanent security guarantees and economic integration of Ukraine into the West.
But you've also said in the past, sorry to keep quoting you back to yourself, you've said that Putin is wily, he's cunning, and he wants all of Ukraine. I mean, therefore, doesn't Donald Trump have mission impossible in trying to negotiate some sort of a settlement with him?
No, just what I just now said is that Putin will, he may look for a pause in the war, and then he would use that to try to regroup with the intent of taking Ukraine again, some point in the future, attacking again. We need to understand that. We need to know that's what he's going to do and take our own steps to prevent him from being able to do that. That's what I'm saying there. We do need an end to the fighting, but then we also need to pivot that to a permanent peace, and that's going to be through strengthening Ukraine, strong security guarantees, ideally NATO membership, and integrating them into the Western economies.
How would you describe the nature of the relationship between those two men, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin?
Well, in a odd sort of way, what you would say is they respect each other because they are both people who understand power and how to use power, and they see that in the other. So it's not a matter of disrespect or knowing that the other's weak or taking advantage of them. I think they understand that their counterpart there, the other guy, actually understands the use of power too. That in some ways may make for a better negotiation.
And having been in the position you've been in as a negotiator for Ukraine in 2017 to 2019, I'm just wondering what your experiences of negotiating with Russians. Have you had to do that? What sort of mindset there is on the Russian side? What sort of insights can you offer us into what it's actually like to sit down and do negotiations with the Putin administration?
Well, the first thing is that there's only one decision maker in Russia, and that's Vladimir Putin. So whoever you're talking to doesn't have any leeway on their own. They're just there to be someone to talk to. But the idea is that you have to influence Putin's decision making. Back then, 2017 to 2019, there was no hot raging war of the kind that we have now. There was a hot war, but it was only a few people a week who were getting killed, nothing as big as it is now, and the front line was not moving. So this was not a major priority for President Trump at the time. A lot has changed since then. But at the time, then my Russian interlocutors would fill the time by talking, but not really be able to make any decisions. I used talks basically to try to explore if there's anything possible. I felt that a couple times there were things worth exploring, but in the end, Putin decided that he wanted to keep things as they were.
I mean, do you think that you and your colleagues and even Donald Trump saw any of this coming? Donald Trump obviously left office in 2020, beginning of 21. Do you think he saw things coming to the point that we've reached now?
Well, you can never predict with certainty what's going to happen in the future. But the idea that Russia would continue to have designs on Ukrainian territory and the possibility of future attacks, absolutely. That's why in 2017, it was President Trump who agreed to lift the arms embargo on Ukraine. You'll remember that President Obama and Chancellor Merkel agreed on not providing Ukraine any lethal defensive arms. Trump reversed that and gave them their first anti-tank systems, and that opened up the gateway for others to provide lethal systems, knowing that Ukraine is going to have to be capable of defending itself someday.
And just lastly, I mean, a lot of rhetoric about the Third World War. It hasn't just come from Moscow, I would add. Donald Trump Jr. Suggested, and some people in the inner sanctum of Donald Trump have said that President Biden is somehow leading the United States and the West into the Third World War. Just to end, really, I mean, how would you assess that threat level? Do you think it's really a reality that we're edging closer to a situation where there's an all-out Third World War?
I think a situation where the U.S. and the West are seen as weak, and where aggressive players like Putin or Iran or China feel that they can act with impunity, that increases the risks of global conflict. And that's exactly what we've seen over the last 3 years. We've seen Russia invade Ukraine. We've seen Iran unleash its proxies in the growth of this war in the Middle East. We've seen increasingly aggressive Chinese behavior against the Philippines, against Vietnam, threats against Taiwan, and that's all because they perceive Western weakness. So restoring a position of strength and trying to maintain peace through a position of strength is the way to prevent a third world war. And if we don't do that, the risks increase.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Kurt Volker, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thanks, Tom.
Well, for more analysis, we can cross now to London and speak to General David Richards, former UK Chief of the Defence Staff. Lord Richards, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. We're getting these reports that suggest that Ukraine has now fired UK-supplied long-range Storm Shadow cruise missiles at Russia for the very first time. Moscow saying it's shot some of these missiles down. Does all of this sound credible to you? And if so, how significant is this?
I think it's certainly credible. Our Prime Minister seemed to be keen to do this a number of weeks ago, but had to wait for President Biden to give authority to use American ATACMS, because there's a linkage to the guidance systems that the British use for their Storm Shadow. So I think it's the case. I mean, we'll, as ever, and I learned this as a soldier of many years, you know, you never believe first reports, but I think it probably is credible and has now happened. The significance, we would say that it might have tactical significance. That's, if you like, local importance. But in terms of the eventual outcome of the war, i.e. the strategic level, I doubt it'll have much value.
So you don't see this as being the major escalation that some in Moscow are calling it?
I can see why the Russians would view it as an escalation, because it does bring Western weapons, allows Western weapons to be fired into and onto Russian territory. So that is an escalation of kinds, but and it will annoy them. There's no doubt about it. They thought they weren't going to have that extra headache because they've already moved a lot of their logistic bases and air bases further east to get out of this possible quandary. But why I say I don't think it's of huge significance is that at the end of the day, it's not going to cause Russia to lose the war. It might put Ukraine into a better bargaining position for when, as even now President Zelensky seems to concede, President-elect Trump comes to power and decides to impose in some way a ceasefire.
Do you think Washington and London were right to give these weapons to Ukraine and the green light to now use them on Russian territory?
Well, I think one could argue that it's too little and too late. And it sounds now, it can appear to some people, it's a little bit sort of a panicky reaction on the back of President Trump winning the election. If this had happened 2 years ago, then I think it could have had much greater significance. The problem that Ukraine has faced from the start is that Western nations, particularly the US, Britain, France, have encouraged President Zelensky and the Ukrainians to fight a war without giving them the means to actually win it. I think that is strategically questionable, but also morally questionable, because people are dying on a daily basis in the hope of achieving a victory that in practice will be very difficult to achieve. So I think I'm with President Trump insofar as now is the time to draw a line under this one way or another. Clearly, Ukraine wants to be in as good a position as she can be at the point that line is drawn. But to go on fighting, and some people talk about a frozen war, means there'll be a very unstable and increasingly unstable situation in Eastern Europe. Mistakes will happen. People do silly things. And suddenly, you know, the thing has got a lot worse. So I think now is the time, unless NATO nations are prepared to enter the war themselves, and I don't think that's going to happen for good reason, then now is the time to start talking about a ceasefire.
Earlier this week, we spoke to a spokesperson for Vladimir Putin, Sergei Markov, who said that people in the UK could be spending Christmas in a bomb shelter. He seemed to suggest that a NATO-Russian confrontation was quite likely by making that comment.
Well, I think, first of all, the only person that really matters is President Putin. Why would he do that when Mr. Trump is about to take over the reins of power? He will not want added problems in terms of resolving this problem, the war in Ukraine. So I doubt personally that is likely to happen. And anyway, that would be, and what he implies in it, a major escalation, which would draw NATO into the war directly, as opposed to the indirect manner in which he is interpreting the use of these Western weapons.
Yeah, the comments were made in the context of the loosening of the nuclear doctrine. I just want to pick up on something you said earlier on this year. You were amongst a group of former defence and security chiefs in the UK who said the British Army must, quote, prepare genuinely for war. You made those comments 8 months ago, and I'm just wondering whether you think that since then the UK is looking more prepared and whether you think the threat is looking greater.
Well, look, I'm the biggest peacenik of all time, like a lot of, I think, reasonably good generals, because we've seen a bit of war. The whole point of preparing for war is not to fight it, God forbid, but to be strong enough to make one's potential adversary not want to take us on. And I think what we've got to remember in the case of Russia and Ukraine is that strategically, Russia has lost. NATO today is stronger, more united than NATO was 3 years ago. They have got hold of the 4 oblasts, or the bulk of the 4 oblasts in the east of Ukraine, and they've retained Crimea. But I don't think one could argue that strategically they've won. But we don't want to take a risk. And therefore, NATO nations now have a period in which they have got to make sure that should Russia up the ante again in some way, I've always personally felt it unlikely, but we shouldn't take the risk by making sure our own armed forces are more than up to any challenge that could be offered by Russia. But look, I'm like a lot of good guys. I said I want to avoid a war. I'm not encouraging one. I think it's time to draw a line under this broadly in the way that I understand President Trump is intending. And that seems to me a very sensible thing to do.
All right, well, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time, Lord Richards. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Well, let's get some more analysis now. We can speak to the former spokesperson for the Russian President Vladimir Putin, Sergei Markov, who joins us now from Moscow. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Mr. Markov. Washington, of course, gave Ukraine the green light to use those long-range army tactical missile systems weapons, also known as ATACMS, against targets in Russia. And we understand they have now been used in Bryansk. I'm just wondering what more you can tell us about the situation.
I think you explained the situation by wrong way. You just repeated those propagandistic lie which expressed by Washington. Situation absolutely another. And Vladimir Putin, President of Russia, stresses very clearly. The point is that it's not allowing for Washington to Ukrainian army to use these rocket missiles. But it's direct using of such rocket missiles against Russia by American army, because Ukrainian army not able to use ATACMS, these ballistic missiles on the long distance to Russia, because Ukrainian army has no technical opportunity such as satellite intelligence group, which needed for using such missiles. Another kind of missiles is Storm Shadow and Scalp Prince Scalp and British Storm Shadow. This is cruise missiles. They also cannot be used by Ukrainian army without America, because it's need, first of all, same satellite group, but also it's needed a very good digital map of Russian territory for such cruise missile. It's even Great Britain and France has not such kind of map, but only Russia and United States. So if these missiles will be used against Russia, it means that American army directly took to the war against Russia. It's not Ukrainian. It's American strike against Russian cities and in other places. It's the point. It's this rocket missile didn't change situation dramatically on the front line, because these missiles have been used already against Crimea, against Donbass, and another new territory of Russia, internationally not recognized.
So if they have been used, Mr. Markov, if they have been used, how's Russia going to respond? How's Russia going to respond if they have been used?
Nobody knows.
Well, Russia must know.
Decide. Russia will wait some moment. Probably Russia will give a strong military response. It means Russia now has the right to attack all American military goals. American military base in Poland, in Germany, in Romania, and another European countries. Also, Russia can attack the American satellites group, which used for such kind of attack, American aviation, military aviation, and so on. Okay. And its military response. Probably first Russia will try to give some political response, sneaking account that this is crime of Joe Biden group. Joe Biden is some kind of regarded in Moscow as a maniac who personally hate Vladimir Putin, because in 2011, Biden strongly recommended Putin not to go to the next presidential term, and Vladimir Putin strongly said no to him.
Let me put this question to you. Let me put this question to you, Mr. Markov. Is the West now in direct conflict with Russia?
Can you repeat? Sorry.
Is the West now in direct conflict with Russia?
Not yet, because we didn't see this big strike yet. There are some rumors that probably in Bryansk region had been used or not used. Now we see indirect, through media, information about that Biden made the decision to come to the direct war against Russia. But we didn't see the real fact about it. When Vladimir Putin sees the real fact, he will react. Frankly speaking, if it will be not strike against Washington and London, it's first of all because goodwill of Vladimir Putin.
Just want to pick up on something you said to the British media. You said that people in the UK could be spending Christmas in bomb shelters. Could you just clarify for us what you meant by that?
Yeah. It's very easy. Of course, Vladimir Putin don't want to give a strong military response and to come to the big global war. Of course, Vladimir Putin don't want to have nuclear war. But you understand, if United States and Great Britain started direct attacking of their militaries against Russia, Russia has to respond. And if it will be exchange of rocket missiles, first of all, non-nuclear, but then it could be moved, because it's nuclear powers, it could be moved to the nuclear, using of nuclear weaponry, and possibly already this year, big nuclear catastrophe could happen. And I mentioned that probably it will happen before Christmas holidays. And probably instead of saying Merry Christmas to all families, British and American people, and we will have to sit down in the holes in the S, trying to hide away from the radioactive clouds.
Okay, well, that's something to think about. And, of course, Mr. Putin has lowered the threshold for a nuclear strike. And it's my last question to you. I mean, just listening to what you were saying and listening to the rhetoric from Moscow the last 24 hours, there are people in the West who say every time the West steps up its support for Ukraine, Russia threatens nuclear war. And, of course, we're 1,000 days into this conflict. So far, that hasn't happened. So what is your message to people who say that Russia is simply bluffing?
Russia don't want to use a nuclear weaponry, but Russia wants to stress that if 3 nuclear powers like United States, Great Britain, and France come to the war against another nuclear power, Russia, this nuclear war could happen even by some natural development of the events. Look how World War I started. Nobody wanted such a big catastrophe as appeared to be this great war as 111. But it happened because events move politicians. Events command politicians, but not politicians command events. It's the situation with Russia afraid very much. And Russia, and I am asking you, British people, don't attack Russia. Don't send your rocket missiles to Russian cities. As a way, you will have the response of Russian rocket missiles to your cities. Take this in your mind.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Well, Sergei Markov, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, turning our eye to the United States as the incoming Trump administration continues to take shape. Now, the television star, Dr. Mehmet Oz, who is better known simply as Dr. Oz, has been selected by the US President-elect Donald Trump to serve as the administrator for the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services. That is a key federal agency that oversees health insurance coverage for more than 150 million Americans. Well, in a statement, Donald Trump said that America is facing a healthcare crisis, and he expressed confidence that no physician is more qualified or more capable than Dr. Oz to make America healthy again. Well, Donald Trump and Dr. Oz have a history of supporting each other politically. In 2018, Trump appointed the cardiothoracic surgeon and TV personality to the Presidential Council on Sports, Fitness and Nutrition, reappointing him in 2020. Then in 2022, Oz ran for Senate in Pennsylvania with Trump's backing, but failed in his election bid. After launching the Dr. Oz show in 2009, Oz became one of the best-known doctors in America, principally due to his appearances on the Oprah Winfrey Show. However, his views on COVID-19 raised some eyebrows, especially when he suggested using an anti-malarial drug as a treatment for the virus. Well, to talk more about this appointment and others, I'm joined now by Mary Jo Jacoby, who is the former Special Assistant to President Reagan and former Assistant Secretary of Commerce under George H.W. Bush. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's start by talking about Dr. Oz. He's going to be leading the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. A budget of $1.7 trillion per year. Do you think he's the right man for the job?
I think that he is a physician and he is a well-known personality. He is committed to President Trump's agenda of cutting the budget and of improving America's health. And so I think in the mind of the president, which is the major mind that matters right now, he is qualified. He will have to go through Senate confirmation when he is formally nominated next year. That will be a challenging process. I've been through it. It's a challenging process for everyone, but the more well-known you are, it seems, the more challenging it will be. So he will not have an easy ride, but my guess is he will be confirmed.
As I said in the introduction, some of his opinions are not universally respected in the scientific community, and I'm just wondering whether there's anything about him that worries you in particular.
Well, I think from a Senate confirmation prospect in a Republican Senate, he has in the past expressed support for gender transitioning of young people. young men to young women to young men, which has become, it has always been controversial. It has become more controversial this year, given the presidential election. And I'm sure he will be questioned a great deal about that. And of course, as you mentioned, some of his comments and his support for some unusual drugs during the COVID period. But let's face it, a lot of doctors and others were getting pretty crazy about things that they thought might help us with COVID because we were in uncharted territory. So he will face a lot of questions, but he is a skilled communicator. And I think one of the things that's common, if you look at the breadth of President Trump's intended appointees so far, most of them have a lot of experience in communications, and in particular television.
Yeah, I mean, there's been critics of the incoming Trump administration, particularly on the other side of the aisle. One that stood out for me says the common theme amongst all the appointees is TV hosts whose main qualification is their loyalty to Donald Trump. Do you think that's fair criticism?
I do not think it's fair, but I do think it is fair game in politics. I've looked at the CVs of his appointees. All of them are highly educated. All of them are highly experienced. Most of them who have come to television came via other routes with business and political backgrounds or military backgrounds. So I think if you look past the headline to the individual, they are highly qualified people.
But looking at it from the outside, I mean, you know, we're talking about a celebrity television doctor here. I mean, you'd have thought, you know, especially he hasn't got any government experience, well, very limited government experience. I'm just wondering, aren't there any more qualified candidates out there?
I'm sure if you looked around for any job, whether you're a president of the United States or the chief executive of a very large company, there is a huge array of candidates available to you. But what the president has done is not unusual for presidents. If you look at President Biden's cabinet, for example, many of them had no experience or expertise in the area to which they were appointed, but they were the president's choice. They had other qualifications that President Biden saw, and these individuals have other qualifications that President Trump, when he becomes president, will see or has seen. And the other thing is, you do, in a political environment, you do want people who will help you execute your agenda. Now, if that means you're loyal to the person, that's fine. If that means you're loyal to the policies, that's even better.
Dr. Oz is going to report to RFK Jr., whose appointment we talked about extensively on this channel last week. He, of course, is going to be running the Department of Health. How do you see these two men, RFK Jr. and Dr. Oz, working together?
I think that they will probably work together very well. They both have huge areas to manage and huge areas of policy to help execute. And I think they will work together. They share a lot of the same positions with respect not only to President Trump's stated agenda, but things like a degree of skepticism about the COVID vaccine, which it has become extremely widespread in the United States now. So I would expect that they will work together well, and they're both experienced people. RFK Jr. in the political arena. Dr. Oz had his own political experience running for the Senate. They understand politics. They understand the American political process. And I think what you'll see is when there are areas of disagreement, those areas will be discussed in private rather than in public, which is, frankly, what any leader wants.
Just before we move on to some of the other appointments, just wrapping up the healthcare department appointments, do you think the Affordable Care Act is somehow at risk of being axed with these two men in charge?
I certainly President Trump, President-elect Trump now, has said that he would like to axe it. I don't think he tried several times when he was president before, and it didn't seem possible. I think even with a Republican Senate and a Republican House, the appetite for that is not huge right now. But I would expect that you would see reform. So specifically with respect to Dr. Oz, President-elect Trump has talked about the whole question of Medicare for all and how you would do that. And a lot of the Democrats have talked about that. It would be incredibly expensive and incredibly difficult to implement. And speaking as someone who is on Medicare, because in America, when you turn 65, regardless of your health insurance status, you have to go on Medicare, which is state-sponsored. I think it's probably not the best solution to apply Medicare to everyone, but I would expect to see a great deal of reform, not only in terms of Medicare and Medicaid, but in terms of the other activities of the Department of Health and Human Services with respect to things like the food pyramid, the recommended foods that are recommended for young people in particular. You can see a lot of reform coming in that regard. And they will be able to do a fair number of things administratively without an act of Congress.
Let's talk about one of the other big appointments of the last 24 hours. In education, Linda McMahon, the former CEO of World Wrestling Entertainment, is tapped for education secretary. I'm just wondering what you think she brings to the job.
She is a seasoned businesswoman. She was the administrator of the Small Business Administration in the first Trump administration. She has acquired a knowledge of how large government agencies with large budgets operate. She was co-head of the Trump transition team. She knows the president quite well. The president's quite well acquainted with her husband, Vince McMahon. And of course, WWE comes to the region quite often. She is a very good businesswoman, a very savvy businesswoman, and she supports the president's agenda. Whether they will be able to abolish the Department of Education, which is something President-elect Trump has said he would like to do, I think that's a very big ask. But going back to my time in government with President Reagan also wanted to abolish the Department of Education. It is a very big, bloated bureaucracy running education at the local level from Washington. And there's a lot of pushback from that, but the support for the department lies with the teachers' unions in the United States, which are incredibly powerful.
I mean, abolishing the Department of Education sounds pretty drastic. I mean, it's a key department and it will shape future generations of Americans. What do you think Donald Trump's vision is for the education of the American people?
I believe that President-elect Trump believes what, frankly, President Reagan believed, that government should be much closer to the people and much closer to the point of service for the people. Education is a local matter, a state matter, and rather than having a giant bureaucracy in Washington telling localities and states what to do, that budget would be administered by state and local governments rather than by a bloated bureaucracy in Washington. So students would still get a lot of attention. There would be still a tremendous amount of taxpayer support for education. It would be a change in how that support is administered.
Okay, some of the other picks that I wanted to discuss with you for the new Trump administration: Matt Gaetz, Pete Hegseth, yes. Two men who've got sexual assault, sexual misconduct allegations hanging over them, which I should add they both deny. Do you think it's fair to say those two are perhaps the most controversial of all of the picks so far?
I think head and shoulders above the others is Matt Gaetz, as in terms of controversy. He's been a member of Congress. He's been investigated. He was investigated by the Justice Department, which did not bring charges on the sexual assault allegations. There is an investigation of the House Ethics Committee pending against him, which by resigning from the House, as he did last week, he has basically ended that. He's a very controversial figure. The term used most frequently to describe him is firebrand. He is incredibly outspoken and incredibly opinionated, and he does have views about the criminal justice system in the United States, which of course is the province of the Department of Justice. With respect to Pete Hegseth, he again is a highly educated, Princeton-educated young man in his 40s. popular because of his appearances on Fox News in America. He is a military veteran, a highly decorated veteran. And I think the president, if I could ascribe thought to President Trump in this case, I would say President-elect Trump sees in him a man who understands the enlisted person in the American military, as opposed to the military brass in Washington. And again, it's the notion of putting people who understand below the top management level what's going on in the Defense Department seems to be the goal there for the president. They are both controversial. They will have to go through this arduous process, which I don't envy them. But it is the process that it is, and they are the president-elect's choices, and therefore, who knows? But it's important for your viewers to keep in mind, President Trump, although he will always be President Trump because he was president before and you carry the title for life, he's currently president-elect, doesn't take office till the 20th of January. These people are not nominated yet. They are his list of desired people to appoint come January. And he has the ability between now and the 60 days that follow to withdraw any of them and reappoint other people, announce other potential appointees as well. So it's not done until the formal announcements once he is formally president.
Sure, and you said at the beginning of this answer that Matt Gaetz was head and shoulders above Pete Hegseth on the sort of the controversy stakes. Yes. And I'm just wondering whether you think that translates into the likelihood that him passing Senate approval is probably going to be the most challenging of all of the hearings up until this point. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
At this moment, it certainly looks that way. He has managed to offend a number of Republicans, including Republican senators, who will now, in essence, stand in judgment of his appointment. And so he will have an uphill fight in getting confirmed. He does seem to be the most vulnerable of the intended nominees at this moment, but we still have some big ones out there. Treasury hasn't been announced yet, and others. So we'll have to see. But at this moment, he looks to be the most controversial and the individual who will have the most difficult time.
Quite a lot of dismantling likely to happen, or is being talked about, with these so-called disruptors who are on the list of nominees. I don't know if you think those labels are accurate or not, but Vice President-elect J.D. Vance talking about an FBI director that he wants who will, quote, dismantle the deep state. Now, the current FBI chief, Chris Wray, is meant to stay there until the year 2027, I gather. But do you think perhaps his head is on the block and he might end up being replaced? And what does dismantling the deep state mean as far as you're concerned?
Well, if you look back through recent history, going back to when Donald Trump ran for president in the first place in 2020, and then again, in 2016, and then again in 2020, and of course this time, there were a number of senior, I think the number was 51 exactly, current and former CIA, FBI, Department of Justice, and other intelligence officials who came out very strongly in opposition to his presidency, to being elected in the first place during his presidency. They were highly critical and highly vocal in that criticism. And that is the deep state. These are the people, what Ronald Reagan used to refer to as the nameless, faceless bureaucrats beneath the political appointees, some of which are political appointees, like the FBI director and the CIA director. But what I would expect that very early in the administration, the president will order that those security clearances be lifted. That means they won't have access to top secret information from inside the government anymore. And you will see a whittling down of the power of these unelected officials in government to control or influence the agenda. It's going to be a very difficult thing. I think what you will see is a concerted effort, not just on the part of the CIA director and the FBI director and the vice president of the United States, but also the DOGE group, the Department of Government Efficiency group, led by Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk. I think you will see them working together with the vice president and others in the administration to try and rein in the unfettered power of the federal government of the United States.
Yeah, rein in unfettered power, and they have another massive challenge, which is to unite a deeply divided country. And I'm just wondering, lastly, whether you think Donald Trump plans to try and unite the United States, and if so, how he plans to do this.
It will be interesting to watch how Donald Trump goes about this, because he has been and remains a divisive figure. But the difference between now and come January and January of 2016 is he does have a mandate. He won more of the popular vote than his opponent did. He won the Electoral College with 321 votes. He took the Senate and retained the House of Representatives. That is a mandate. It is not a landslide, but it is a mandate. He has been elected by the people to do this. The other thing that's interesting, if you listen to political pollsters, which are largely discredited right now, but one of the things that came through loud and clear in this campaign that worked to Donald Trump's favor is the question of disruption. And a majority of Americans, a clear majority of Americans, either wanted major disruption or chaos. They were in favor of that. And Donald Trump is the candidate to deliver that.
Okay, well, we'll have to wait and see how events unfold. Thank you very much indeed. Mary Jo Jacobi, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us.
Thank you, Tom. It's been a pleasure.
Well, that is all we have time for this special edition of Global News Today. Wherever you are in the world, and if you're celebrating Christmas, we wish you all the very best.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Tokyo, the world's most populous metropolitan area with 35 million people and one of the most expensive cities, Greater Tokyo. For its crowded places and high cost of living, what makes Tokyo worth a visit? The city is teeming with history, culture, and sights. One of the most popular is the Hachiko statue, a tribute to the dog loyal to his master. Hachiko, who died of a heart infection in 1935, is regarded a national celebrity and has a bronze statue of him outside Shibuya Station in his honor. A lesser-known Disneyland also lies in Tokyo. It first opened in 1983 and would see over 13 million visitors per year, making it the third most popular theme park in the world. Also find the animation studio of Studio Ghibli Inc., often referred to as the Japanese Disney. The studio's Oscar-winning feature Spirited Away is the highest-grossing film in Japanese history. Another frequently visited site is the Imperial Palace. The palace became the official imperial residence in 1869. It remains the main residence of Japanese Emperor Akihito. For historic Shinto sites, most recommended is the Meiji Shrine in Shibuya. Shinto is Japan's dominant religion. It means the worship of the deities of heaven and earth. The Meiji Shrine is the most highly regarded of all and is an immaculate example of Japan's impressive architecture. Sporting events are also popular in Japan. The Tokyo Dome is a 55,000-seater all-weather multi-purpose home of Japan's most famous team, the Tokyo Tomiuri Giants. All over the world, Japanese food is very popular. Japanese fare is favored by many because of their incredible cooking and attention to precision and preparation. The place keeps their menu simple and delicious and is visited again and again because of its classic tonkatsu, cutlets of tender breaded pork slow-cooked to perfection. When it comes to shopping, many visit Tokyo for its haven of electronics and gadgets. For Japanese fashion, visit the hip, edgier Harajuku district. Here, you'll bump into younger individuals cosplaying or adults dressed in very clean minimalist styles.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers,